On behalf of the Center for Policy Dialogue, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you to this very important discussion that we have organized this morning, which is a review of budget and climate budget and recommendations for climate public finance management in Bangladesh. As you know, climate issues are becoming increasingly important for Bangladesh for various reasons, and public finance management in the context of climate impact management is also becoming very important. So there are many issues involved. Some are diagnostics, but we know that many problems have been identified, but how to address those both within Bangladesh in our policy process, planning process, and also in terms of coordination with our global partners, development partners. These issues are becoming very important, issues of coordination, integration, mainstreaming. So we think that this discussion will be very important in terms of advancing those concerns and also identifying actionable solutions with regard to the problems and the questions and queries that we are facing as of now. So we are very happy that we have amongst us so many interested stakeholders who are very keen not only in terms of various actions which are being taken in the context of climate impact challenges, but also our development partners who are here and who are supporting us in various ways in implementing the programs that the government and also non-government, non-state actors are also taking in this context. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to Mr. Saber Hossain Chowdhury, our chief guest of today. As they say, for those who know him, no introduction is necessary. For those who don't know him, no introduction will be enough. So, Saber Bhai is a member of parliament and also he's the chairman of the standing committee on Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate. But he has many hats and also globally playing a very important role in advancing the interests of not only Bangladesh, but as a chairman of the International Parliamentary Committee, he also played a very important role in addressing the challenges facing the developing countries particularly. So, Saber Bhai, thank you very much for joining us, and as chair of the Parliamentary Standing Committee, he is playing a very important role, key role, and his distinction is that he is a man of action, not of words, and we have seen that when we invite him to this type of discussions, he follows it up with initiative as a member of parliament. And we have seen it several times that many of the suggestions that emerge from this type of discussion, he takes it back to the parliament and does his best to get them integrated into policies and into actions. So that is his distinctive characteristic, and we are very happy to have him. We will also have as our special guest Mr. Tanveer Shakil Joy, Member of Parliament. He is also member of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate. He will be joining us very soon. Our presentation will be made by our Executive Director in her dual role as the Executive Director as also the presenter of today's main keynote. Dr. Fahmida Khatun obviously is an expert in climate and environment related areas, and today the discussion that we will have is important because the budget has been already accepted 23-24 budget, but public finance management in the context of climate and what are the fiscal implications of the budgetary various decisions, allocations, distribution of resources, various programs in the annual development program, ADP, these are very important. So public finance management in the context of climate impact challenges is very important, and she will be presenting the paper which she has co-authored with Mr. Fakhruddin Al-Kobir, research associate, CPD. Maybe Dr. Fahmida will introduce him when she will be speaking. We have very distinguished panel of discussants with us who will share their views on the presentation, but also take the discourse beyond perhaps what will be presented and bring in other dimensions to this discourse and reflect on some of the issues which they think are important. So very happy to have Dr. Muhammad Asaduzzaman. Asad Bhai is former research director of our premier research institute in Bangladesh, BIDS, Bangladesh Institute of Development Studies, and he has been associated with many global also studies in environment and climate related issues. We are very happy to have with us Ms. Naoki Martinez Beckstrom, who is First Secretary, Environment and Climate Change, Development Cooperation Section, Embassy of Sweden in Bangladesh. Welcome, and thank you for your participation. Dr. Hasif Mohammad Irfanullah is one of our esteemed discussants. Today, he is visiting research fellow at Center for Sustainable Development, CSD, University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh, ULAB. So thank you very much for joining us today. And Dr. Maliha Mozammel, thank you for joining us. She is climate change specialist, resilience and inclusive growth cluster, RIG cluster at UNDP. At the Dhaka office. Thank you very much. And Mr. Partho Hafiz Sheikh, thank you for joining us today as a panelist. Mr. Partho is Director, Policy and Advocacy, WaterAid, Bangladesh. So you can see that we have a very knowledgeable group of discussants who will share their thoughts and views on the presentation, and also, as I said, will take our discussion in other directions which are also important or could become important as we go forward. Thank you, members of the media who are present here from print and electronic media, and dear guests. So let us begin our proceedings now. So I will invite Dr. Fahmida to present her keynote within maybe 25 minutes. Okay. Thank you, Fahmida.
Thank you, Chair, Professor Mustafizur Rahman, Honorable Chief Guest, and distinguished panelists, and also distinguished guests. Once again, on behalf of the Center for Policy Dialogue, I would like to welcome you and thank you for joining today, this morning, at this dialogue. As has been given this introduction by the chair, so I wouldn't repeat some of them. I just want to highlight before I start my presentation is that budget analysis is CPD is one of the important activities, and every summer in June. In fact, before June, March, starting from March till the end of June. So our activities related to budget starts. So we do provide recommendations for the budget before the budget is formulated to the government, to the Ministry of Finance, and also to the National Board of Revenue. And then once the budget is announced, the following day morning, we do organize a media briefing to present our views on the budget, and then later on we organized a dialogue which was held on 18 June this year. So those are very thorough analysis of the budget, overall budget, but we also thought that some of the issues which need special attention and further discussion on a standalone basis. So climate change issues is one of those, and we thought that we will discuss, and as has been mentioned by Chairperson, that it is not, today's presentation is not only about the discussion on climate budget and what is allocated and what is not, but also within the broader framework of public finance management, which is an ongoing issue. And as we are working, in fact, we have a number of projects, research work at CPD on public finance management in various areas, and climate change is another area where this public finance management has to be looked into, and climate issues have to be integrated within this public finance management. So my co-author is Mr. Fakhruddin Ahmed. I think, Fakhruddin, wherever you are, please stand up. Thank you very much for your contribution in preparing this research. And so I will, since time is limited and this presentation is just a kick-off, so not a very detailed discussion, this because of the time limitations of the time. So we'll just give some overview of some important issues. So just to begin to give the context that the importance of climate change, we know that the physical, economic and social implications of climate-related risks are widely acknowledged in Bangladesh and also many other countries. And that's why the need for finance in tackling climate issues is very, very important and huge. There are a number of estimations. I would just mention two estimations. One says that the implementation of the National Adaptation Plan, you know that plan has been adopted by the government, that will require $230 billion during 2023 to 2050. So in addition to that, developing climate resilience will require 7 times the current spending to transform adaptation, and that will be at a rate of $8.5 billion per year, with $6 billion per year from external sources or international climate funds and development partners. This is the information from the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. World Bank has also estimated that Bangladesh will need at least 12.5 billion approximately, which is 3% of the GDP in the medium term by 2025. So you can see that the resource requirement is so large, but there exists a huge gap in terms of climate-related expenditures, though there are a lot of commitments not only at the national level but also at the global level. And in case of climate issues, public expenditure, that plays a very important role, because public expenditure can serve as a catalyst, an important catalyst for mobilizing resources from other sources. And climate budget, national climate budget, why it is important? Because it is important as it helps identification, classification, categorization of climate-related expenditures. And it also helps improvement of the allocation of public expenditures, and also the revenue generation from many climate-related, many activities which are related to climate change. So when we talk about green fiscal measures, those are important components of climate budget. And it also helps, most importantly, that the accountability and transparency of climate expenditures. So when you talk about green public financial management, there are various concepts, discussions on that, but basically green public financial management is the integration of an environmental and climate-friendly perspective into the PFF process, system and frameworks. So, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, established the Paris Collaborative on Green Budgeting in 2017, many of you know. That has subsequently created an inventory of green budgeting, building blocks, and successful national experience, particularly in advanced countries. But not many countries have that mechanism. Till now, only 14 countries of OECD members, they are implementing some form of green budgeting. Among these countries are mentioned here. So in Bangladesh, the climate change relevance of the national budget has been increased over time, and the first implementation of the climate budget was in 2017. So there are number of legal and policy-related framework in Bangladesh on the basis of which climate-related actions are taken, including climate financial expenditures. So these are, you can see there are many. I wouldn't go through that. This is just a snapshot of these various acts and programs, and also plans, long-term plans, medium-term plans, short-term plans also. So these are the basis of undertaking activities by the government of Bangladesh, and also development partners and many other partners. So just to look at the climate fiscal framework in Bangladesh. In 2014, climate fiscal framework was established, which aimed to estimate the cost and priorities of climate actions, and then also access international and national sources for climate finance. And the other objective is to deliver climate finance, track climate expenditures, make climate finance and expenditures accountable. Then we also have SDG and public finance management in 2015, because SDGs have several targets and goals, and climate action is one of them. So that's very relevant. So that has the objective to adoption of SDGs, and it is also a 5-year comprehensive public finance management reform strategy. The tenure was from 2016 to 2021. The other important framework is updated climate fiscal framework 2020. And that it is actually a climate fiscal framework which is to align the framework within the new development strategies and engage relevant stakeholders. It aims to include the role of private sector, NGOs, CSOs to make it more citizen-centric, and also raise the profile of the framework itself. And together with fiscal policies like tax, value-added tax, subsidy, and pricing, it also focuses on some policies, namely lending policies and insurance policy, as these are closely linked with the fiscal policies of the government. Now, so this, we have seen the framework. So following, how did it come, this climate budget in Bangladesh? See, following the recommendations of the climate fiscal framework prepared by the Finance Division of Ministry of Finance, and it was published in 2014, we have just seen. The first climate budget was reported in 2017. And in the early years, the number of ministries was less. In 2017-18, 6 ministries and divisions, they were considered to prepare climate budget. So Ministry of Finance approached them, asked them to prepare their budget, and as of now, in fiscal year 2024, a total of 25 ministries and divisions, they are considered in preparing climate budget. So the climate, while preparing climate budget, the expenditures are categorized as climate relevant allocations. So climate relevant allocations are considered from the total allocation of projects and programs under these ministries, 25 ministries, under 6 thematic areas. And these thematic areas are mentioned in the Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan, which is called BCCAP. And these thematic areas include food security, social protection and health, infrastructure, mitigation and low carbon development, comprehensive disaster management, research and knowledge management, and finally capacity building and institutional strengthening. So if you just look at some of the allocation, the pattern of allocation so far since 2016, we would see just a few important features. Climate relevant development expenditure has increased from 40% of total climate budget expenditure in 2016 to 62% of total expenditure in 2015. This is a positive initiative. Why we say that? Because development expenditure, we want the development expenditures higher than non-development expenditures. So this trend is a positive one. The cumulative budget allocations for 25 ministries and divisions account for about 54% of the total budget, which is 8.99, almost 9% of the climate, which the climate relevant budget is about 9%. So the budget allocation has decreased by 0.45% in 2024 compared to the revised budget of the 23. So this is again, so we see that the decline compared to the last year, which is not a good sign. Of course, we want it to be increased every year by certain extent. So total revised budget allocation for climate change increased by 0.85%. From 4.78% of the total revised budget in 2022 to 5.6% of the total revised budget in the fiscal year 2023. So we are comparing two revised budgets. So we are not, since the budget for 2024 had just been announced, so we just compared with the revised budget of 2022 and 2023. So, but if you look at the share of budget, climate budget as a share of total GDP, the total allocation has increased to 0.84% in 2023 compared to 2022. This is a small increase by about 0.13%. Now, there are 6 thematic areas, but if we just look some of the patterns of allocations in thematic areas, the highest allocation goes for food security, social protection and health. But on the other hand, we see that the lowest share of climate budget goes for research and knowledge management theme. It is not only applicable for the climate budget, but it is this is a pattern for overall budget also. Always, there is since there are competing priorities, research and knowledge management gets the lowest allocation, which should not be, because we need innovation and knowledge to deal with various challenges. 2 important thematic areas, one is mitigation and low carbon development, and the other one comprehensive disaster management, are not among the top recipients of climate change. In fact, the allocation for mitigation and low carbon development increased over the years a little bit, and the disaster management, for that it has declined. We don't know, because from the documents there are no explanation. But maybe one reason could be that the disaster management has the capacity or for disaster management has increased and has been efficient, but we can't say that the frequency of disaster has not declined actually. The other part of climate budget is, of course, always the budget utilization, because no matter how much you allocate, unless you can utilize, the effectiveness is not that much. So the budget utilization, you can see from this graph that it has shown a fluctuating pattern since 2016. And in 2016, the utilization rate was 94%. Since then, in fact, it has declined. It has been declining, except for in 2019. And in the most years, we see that utilization has declined, but utilization of non-development climate budget is higher than the utilization of the development budget. It should have been the other way around. So this is one of the patterns. Now, the allocation for the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, that has increased slightly, but the allocation for the climate criteria, that is strengthening institutional capacity for climate risk management, and which is under the thematic area of capacity building, that has increased. However, the utilization has declined. So sometimes, even if you have higher allocation, the utilization is not in the same, trend. Now here we see the priority areas of the 25 ministries and divisions. So where are the most important allocations? As I have mentioned earlier, that most of the allocation goes for food security, social protection and health, and here about 10 ministries and divisions, their priority areas is this. So this is well and good, but I just want to mention one or two characteristics which actually do not bode quite well with the objective of environment. Why I say that? Because if you look at the food security, social protection and health, that is the top, as we have just seen, and in fact over 95% of the total allocation is under this for the Ministry of Environment. And within this food security, social protection and health, the development of climate resilient cropping system and production technologies. This is one area where the Ministry of Industries, they work on, they have allocation. But this expenditure of the Ministry of Industries, this includes construction of 47 new buffer warehouse, out of which 13 were approved in 2017, 34 in 2018. This buffer warehouse in various districts with the goal of facilitating fertilizer distribution and addressing damages caused by climate change. Of course, you need fertilizer for agriculture production, but then these are all chemical fertilizers. So this contradicts with the whole environmental objectives, because these are chemical fertilizer and these are harmful for the environment and human health. So you can see sometimes, actions and activities, they have contradictory objectives. So we have to be really careful. And this allocation has been termed as a climate relevant expenditure. So we have to be mindful about that. This is one. And then over the years, the allocation for mitigation and low carbon development, that has been declined in the Ministry of Industries. But the other allocation in the Road Transport and Highways Division, we know that for environmental friendly and sustainable infrastructure, allocation for this Road Transport and Highways Division is very, very important. It has an important role, but allocation for this division on climate relevant activities has increased as a percentage of total climate budget. However, this allocation for BCCP theme on mitigation and low carbon development has been drastically declined. Overall, if overall climate, within the overall climate budget, it has declined. And in fact, particularly for the Road Transport and Highways Division, it has declined. Here we have shown that in 2022, the revised budget was 80, almost little over 81%. That has gone down to 21% in 2023, and in the budget, it has in budget for 2024, it has been proposed as 24.5%. So this is a shift from the priorities. So of course there are some ministries where this theme has larger allocation, but then this, given the importance of this, and the contribution of this sector towards the climate relief or emission, more allocation should be this in this division. So the other area that we know that there are a lot of people, vulnerable people, who are affected due to climate change impact. They are directly affected, and in 2024 there have been some allocation for this the people under the social safety net programs, but it is only 6% of the total allocation for allocation of this SSNP. So here are the areas, programs which are related to the social safety net programs for the climate vulnerable people. So there is a need to increase in these areas, no doubt. And the allocation for renewable energy and fossil fuel, as we know that we have, the government of Bangladesh has a has an objective to achieve 40% of its energy from renewable sources by 2041, and there have been, investment also investing. Government has been investing in solar power projects, particularly through installation of solar home systems and solar mini grids in rural areas, and also it has implemented policies to promote investment in wind, biomass, and hydropower projects. But the allocation for renewable energy shows a fluctuating trend. You can see in the table, and only about 3% of the total allocation for energy sector was allocated for the renewable energy, which is very minimal. It should be, if we really want to achieve that target, it has to be, multiplied. Now, we will be doing some assessment of the implementation and also the adequacy of funds, how coherent with the objectives of, of climate budget and also green public finance management. As part of its medium and long-term strategies, the government of Bangladesh is committed to undertake a number of activities. I have mentioned some of these here. One is that mobilizing resources for climate change trust fund. So government is committed to mobilize and strengthen the CCTF, and the size of the fund as of June 2023 is little over 1,400 crore. But it is far below the target, because it has to be, which has been stated in the 8th five-year plan, that from 2020 to 2025, it should be 8,000 crores. So we are at this point in time, we are about 1,400 crore, a huge shortage. Then utilizing the Green Climate Fund, GCF, but there again we see that as of June 2023, a total of 374 million is there for financing facilities for 7 projects, which has been approved for Bangladesh. Then the other objective is the increased oversight of the climate change fund. The government has objective, for third-party monitoring of the climate change trust fund, so that the funds are utilized and not misused, and not used for unproductive projects. Then formulation and advancement of national adaptation plan. We know that Bangladesh has already submitted its SNAP to the UNFCCC in 2022, and it has a lot of activities. It has renewed existing policies and programs and activities in a coherent manner. So these are government's objectives, and there are much more. One is improved understanding of climate change in the local government, and in fact there are a lot of activities are ongoing. So this is a key mechanism for the government to enhance the national capacity to improve the measures for adaptation to climate change at the local level. And as part of this, a multi-donor collaborative initiative of the government of Bangladesh, UNDP, UNCDF, EU, and SIDA has been undertaken, which aims to enhance the capacity of vulnerable communities, local government institutions, and civil society organizations for planning and financing climate change adaptation solutions in selected vulnerable areas. Then addressing climate change-induced migration. So this is a real problem, and the government is committed to address climate change-induced migration in various plans, such as National Adaptation Plan and Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan, through extension of social safety net programs. But as I have mentioned earlier, that the allocation for this is very little. Commitment to renewable energy, that has also, I have mentioned that government's commitment in terms of increasing the renewable energy sources, and linking it to the national grid, and to reduce the carbon emission, because Bangladesh has, as of now, Bangladesh has both voluntary commitment and conditional commitment on nationally determined commitments on NDCs. Then there are other activities, gender focus of climate change, climate action. The government prioritizes the gender transformative climate action. In fact, in 2013, the government formulated Bangladesh Climate Change and Gender Action Plan, And since then, the plan has not been updated, of course, which should be updated because it's been almost over 10 years. The change and pattern and impact of climate change has changed, has taken different shapes over the years. So it has to be reviewed and updated. Then the ADP allocation for improving the capacity of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. The ministry undertakes coordinating functions and plays the lead role in developing and enforcing environmental policies. And the 8th five-year plan of Bangladesh has proposed a significant increase in the ADP allocation, annual development programs allocation, for climate and environmental issues. But the allocation continues to fall behind the target as stated in the 8th five-year plan. You can see in the table we have presented that what was mentioned in the 8th five-year plan as the targets for this climate related ADP allocation and where we are. So that's now looking at the methodology for tracking. So how the tracking of climate finance, the climate related finances are done. This is a schematic presentation where you can see this is of course from the taken from the Climate Public Expenditure Institutional Review of 2012. So there are various sources of finance, then government annual development plan, non-government delivery mechanism, and there are also domestic sources. You can see domestic sources will contribute 75% of the total requirement and foreign resources 25%. And then the sub-components are presented here. You can have a look later on, and many of you, of course, know this. Now, also how this tracking is done. Since 2018-19 fiscal year, the finance division has been quantifying the amount of climate finance in the climate budget report from the built-in climate public fiscal tracking methodology in the IBUS++ system. As you know, that is a system where all these accountings are done by the Ministry of Finance. So it has been incorporated there. But here only public sources, fund of public finance is considered for tracking. But we feel that there is a scope to track also the private sector financing if it can be incorporated into the system. And Bangladesh has adopted a hybrid approach that is, it's a mix of objective-based and benefit-based approach, where you can describe the objective as well as that what sort of benefits or outcomes are achieved through that. So this was described as the objective-based cost component approach in climate public finance tracking in Bangladesh in 2018. So here are the steps, 5 systematic steps. These are all available. The Ministry of Finance has prepared these 5 steps where we can see that how the climate finance is tracked. So I wouldn't go through, I think time is running out. Now, a little bit more on the climate finance tracking, because this is one of a set of climate-related financial planning and management tool which is designed to understand the resource commitment and also to address the adverse effect of climate change. And as has been mentioned that in 2018, the first climate public finance tracking system has been published, and these are the objectives that why such tracking is needed, and this is also from the Ministry of Finance. Now, how effective can be public, climate finance tracking? We are tracking, but is it effective, or what should be done to do it, to make it more effective? So, in fact, Bangladesh is one of the few countries which has made some step, a significant step in formulating the fiscal framework, which is aligned with existing measures. And it is, in fact, it is an important entry point to green budgeting. And Bangladesh has integrated few components, for example, tagging green expenditures of green public finance management. However, Bangladesh needs a comprehensive green public finance management, so that budget execution and accountability is ensured, and also public participation is ensured at all levels. So this is where you can see, we can have key entry points for green budgeting. Public finance management, what is green public finance management? You all know, just to highlight a few points, that it aims at adapting the existing public finance management practice to support climate sensitive policies, and it can enable an integrated government strategy to combat climate change, not as a standalone program. And Green PFM also ensures that green policies are effective and funded with fiscal constraint, even if there is fiscal constraint. Some guiding principles to implement green public finance management. This has been taken from IMF. They have this, the components, how green PFM reform can be, implemented, formulated and implemented. There are some good country examples where we have seen that they have made green PFM as part of their legal framework. Kenya's Climate Change Act of 2016 that mandates the integration of National Climate Change Action Plan into sectoral strategies. Sweden's Climate Act establishes that the government's climate policy must be implemented in a manner that enables climate targets and budgetary targets to interact. And Uganda is another where PFM Act 2015 was amended by the National Climate Change Act to include climate considerations in the budget process. In Canada, the Auditor General Act was amended in 2022 to provide the Auditor General a specific mandate related to the environmental and sustainable development. So these are some of the examples. There are many more, just to provide a glimpse of that. Now, way forward, just a few recommendations on the basis of what we have observed. So, on the whole, Bangladesh has laid the foundation for green PFM mechanism. However, we need to design and implement a comprehensive PFM. Bangladesh actively seeks climate finance from various sources, international sources, including GCF, GEF, and other bilateral sources. And these funds are used for climate-related projects. We know that. Project development is a problem, because many a times, because of due to lack of bankable projects, we are not being able to receive funds. But we all know that mobilization of climate fund should be expedited. And while we mobilize, we should be also increasing our utilization to make it more effective. The tagging in various BCSP thematic areas are weighted. There is a weighting, if you look at the document of the government, that how climate relevant expenditures are done, which components should be given what type of weight. They provide weights to various components, but we feel that some of the components, it should be reviewed, and that should be given more clarity, that some of the expenditures required more clarity, because as I have given some example that how those will benefit the climate and environmental goals, we don't, it's not clear to us. Rather, many of those are contradictory, so that requires more clarity. Private sector fund from developed countries to developing countries, this is a significant source of climate funding. Bangladesh should also actively source that, actively work at the international level as well. And allocation for vulnerable people should be increased, as mentioned earlier in my presentation. With regard to climate budgeting, the reform has to be done. In fact, whole financial architecture and financial budgeting system, it's an ongoing process, and it should be reformed so that it is considered as an all-inclusive strategy aligned with national policies. Climate budgeting reform should be integrated with the PFM reform agenda, and methodologies for reporting, monitoring, verification of climate-related expenditures should be robust. And as I have just shown in one of the chart, that Ministry of Finance should be in charge. It is in charge to drive the climate budgeting reform, but other ministries should be also part of the reform project, because otherwise there is no ownership established in the process. Besides that, broader stakeholders, including the private sector, NGOs, civil society organizations, community-based organizations, should be engaged not only in the formulation but also in the whole implementation of the climate budget process. And also for better integration of climate budget tagging into the national budget process, and for better tracking of climate-related expenditures, capacity development of relevant human resources is essential. So these are some of the issues which I wanted to highlight in the presentation. I would end here. Thank you very much for your patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Fahmida, for that excellent presentation. I think Dr. Fahmida has raised a number of issues as well. Although she mentioned that amongst the developing countries, perhaps Bangladesh has the distinction of doing a number of important things, I would say, in terms of policies, as she has mentioned, in terms of tracking, in terms of following up with the fiscal budgetary measures. So I think that that's the necessary factors. Maybe some of the sufficient factors are missing, which we also heard from her in terms of bringing in new policies, in terms of coordination, mainstreaming, financing, looking at climate change impact, adaptation, mitigation, resilience from the perspective of the actions that need to be taken. So she has at the end mentioned a number of areas where we can do much more. And I think that you will also discuss some of those. I'm very happy that we have been joined by our special guest, Mr. Tanveer Shakil Joy, a Member of Parliament. As I was mentioning at the beginning, he is also a member of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Environment, Forest and Climate Change. So welcome, Joy. We are very happy also that we have been joined by Mr. Mohammad Ramjan Ali Pramanik, who is the Director General of Bangladesh Water Development Board. So at one point of time, he is a very important player. So at one point of time, I will also bring you to our discussion. But now we have, as I said, 5 very distinguished panelists. I'm sorry that I have been given the tough task of time management. I think that is the only distinction that I have here. So I will request our panelists to be within 7 to 8 minutes so that we have also we can hear from the audience, where I can see a number of very distinguished guests who are experts in these particular areas. And also I would like to mention that our chief guest is not only Member of Parliament and Chair of the Parliamentary Standing Committee, but he is also Special Envoy to the Honorable Prime Minister on climate change and environment. So Saber Bhai, as the Special Envoy of the Honorable Prime Minister, I think some of the actions and suggestions which our panelists and our audience will come up with, we hope that he can also take it to the highest level. So I think that is also, for us a very opportunate, moment, because we can then translate some of your suggestions into actions as well. So as I said, we have 5 distinguished panelists. I will start with Mr. Partha Hefaz Sheikh, as Director of Policy and Advocacy in WaterAid Bangladesh. He is playing a very important role in terms of translating some of the policies into actions. So your 7-8 minutes.
Thank you,
Partha.
sir. Thank you to CPD, Honorable Chief Guest, Honorable Special Guest. As usual, CPD and Famida Appa, you have done a wonderful job of analyzing, our climate budget at the national and at the macro level. But for us, as you were saying, that we kind of translate things into the field. So sometimes, the macro level, we always want to look into how that's been there. I know everybody here understands this, but just presenting, a couple of facts that how difficult it would be for us to do things. BCC SAP, which is currently being reviewed, if I'm not wrong, has 6 pillars. Our Delta Plan 2100 has 6 hotspots. NAP has 6 goals, 23 broad strategies, 28 outcomes, 8 sectors, 113 interventions in 11 climate stress areas. And as Famida Appa has said, our IBAS is only looking into the BCC SAP's 6 pillars. So how do we really incorporate all those? Because currently NAP, we are trying to implement the NAP. The government would try to implement the NAP. We are also trying to look into how, as INGOs, NGOs, we can contribute to NAP. But we really need to understand when you talk about public finance management, really at what level and what kind of expenditure is being made. So for example, if somebody wants to look into what has been the expenditure in terms of Satkhira Shamnagar or in Rangpur, Kurigram, somewhere in Lalmonirhat, can we really look into and say, okay, in these hotspots or on these climate state areas, these are the kind of money that is being spent. So can we really go into IBAS++ and do that? I think there needs to be some way that we really need to be doing that, because for us, when we are trying to look into climate budget in terms of water sanitation hygiene, and just to share our experience over the last 10 years in WaterAid Bangladesh, we've been trying to analyze water sanitation hygiene budget in terms of the national budget, and and where the budgets are. And we have seen continuously that in the hardcore areas, in hard-to-reach areas, such as the coastal, such as the hills, such as the Haor, there has been a continuous, same kind of investments which are very low. Not even 1 to 2% of the whole WASH budget goes into that area. So we really need to understand that when we're talking about the Delta Plan or even the NAP, let's not go into Delta Plan, the 11 stress areas, can IBAS tell us that what, in which climate stress areas, these are the kind of budgets are being spent on this kind of activities, which basically is going to, contribute to the goals and whatnot. So that is something which probably, I would place to this August body and try to take it forward. That's one. The two, Famida Appa has rightly said, finance ministry can take the lead, but each and every ministry has to understand, their contribution to the climate policies. And to do that, I'm sure, there are some kind of capacity development needs are there. And also, how when they do all that, how the CSOs, the INGOs, the NGOs can be part of that process. That is something which really needs to be there. The other thing that Famida Appa, you have said is around, it's only about the public money which is currently being there, and you said there are opportunities of incorporating or tracking private sector financing. But I will also go into to the NGO AB, the NGO Bureau. of Bangladesh, how the NGOs are contributing to the whole NAPS and all that. So probably they can also give you an idea of how much money the NGOs are spending in Bangladesh in terms of all this. So probably, when you are looking into the methodology of tracking climate finance and climate budget formulation, those are the things that can be incorporated into the whole process. The development and non-development, I think this is kind of a thing that has been going on in Bangladesh. The expenditure, whatever that is being allocated, we are not spending 100%, hardly 90, 92, 93% each year. So the opportunity is missed whenever, 100 taka is allocated in the national budget and we are not being able to spend it. So there needs to be a way that we have to increase our capacity to do that. So somehow, it's being there for a long time. We really need to, get a crack at that, try to solve that, implementation part of that story there. Couple of things that I write. So, as I said, so just to say, a couple of last comments. It's fine that you have kind of looked into the BCCSAP because the government's 25 ministries, that book that comes out is really focused on the BCCSAP's focus areas. But I think that also probably needs to kind of change, taking into account the NAP, the NDCs, and change, climate change, BCCSAP, that should be out in a couple of months probably. So those are the things that I would really say that we can. Also, looking into the ministry-specific climate finance, how even within the ministries they're spending on various topics. For example, coming back to my kind of expertise in terms of water sanitary hygiene, can we also look into the various sectors of the government, and particularly how much in terms of what WASH, climate resilient WASH, the money is being spent. So those are the things that really needs to be there, and it would help us not only as a country but also in terms of the CSOs and NGOs that we are, to really also tighten our belts and do whatever in terms of we can to contribute to the policies. Let me stop there, and so thank you for the opportunity, and thank you, Fahmid Appa, for a brilliant presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Partha Hifaz Sheikh, for those comments and also important suggestions. I think one point that I would like to stress is you have mentioned about the IBIS++ and how we can have more disaggregated data, which will help us in terms of our actions. And he also highlighted the issues of coordination among ministries and how we can have more detailed data with regard to the actions that they are taking, so that the money which we are spending is well spent. Because the topic of today is public finance management. That's the the core distinctive phrase here. So in the context of climate change activities that we are doing. So thank you very much. And also you have mentioned about bringing in private sector financing in the IBIS++. I don't know whether that can be done. IBIS++ generally tracks the public finance, but I think the system can be widened and broadened in order to include private sector, and also
I was more looking into also the INGOs, NGOs that stand, and the NGO Affairs Bureau, because we always,
Yeah, also
each
the
year,
yes,
each year,
also,
we submit our reports.
exactly. Yeah, I was going to tell that point also you have made with regard to the NGO bureau. I think that's also a very good suggestion, because many non-state actors are also spending a lot, and if we want to coordinate better, obviously that also will need to be factored into the equation. Thank you very much. Now I'm very happy to bring in Dr. Maliha Muzammil. As I mentioned, Dr. Maliha is a climate change specialist, resilience and inclusive growth, recluster at the UNDP. Yes, Dr. Maliha, your 7 to 8 minutes. Please.
Thank you very much. I'll try to take 5 minutes.
No, no.
Mr. Sheikh already mentioned a few of the points I would have liked to talk about. Firstly, the climate change fiscal framework, UNDP actually supported the government in the formulation and updating of the climate change fiscal framework in 2020. Since then, there has been no update. We have had the NAP, we have had the Delta Plan, we have had various other local development plans. None of these were integrated into the climate fiscal framework. So we are hoping, and we're in the process of also trying to figure out how we can help the government in updating this plan in order to align it with these various other development policies. Another thing that I would like to mention is that the finance division currently does not have any outfit who would be able to, no dedicated coordination mechanism exists, or no dedicated body exists within the division who would be able to carry out this coordination mechanism. So definitely this is a capacity need that needs to be fulfilled. Also, in terms of the climate change relevant sector ministries, there is a very little focus on sectoral plans, on sectoral financing strategies. So we need to design public investment and service delivery programs with climate change in mind, along with the very relevant sectoral ministries. And we are also in the process of trying to work with these key sectoral ministries and trying to help them design their key performance indicators and trying to see how those can help them attain their climate change goals. Another thing I would like to mention is that we really need to work on the broader fiscal regime of the government. So, for example, the taxation policies, the subsidies that were mentioned, and the pricing policies, as well as the debt management strategies, really need to be climate inclusive, gender inclusive. So, UNDP has only very recently started working with the NBR and Finance Division on helping them look at their policies with a gender lens, and also think about slow policy reforms in this area. This is a long road of work, but we're hoping that this is something that we will all be able to address together. I think I would also like to mention something that we very often miss on, and which is impact monitoring and measurement. So we really need to capacitate the IMAD, the Implementation Monitoring and Evaluation Division, along with the Department of Environment, if we are very serious about implementing these climate change budget reforms. So how can we build their capacity so that they can monitor the effectiveness of all these climate change related expenditures and projects that are being implemented? And this is something we're very keen to be working on as well. I think we've also been working a lot with the parliamentary committees and parliamentary members. And one of the questions that Mr. Sheikh was asking related to how can we actually track union level or Upazila level budget allocation. UNDP has worked with the local government division to formulate a climate vulnerability index. And this index currently spreads only to 36 Upazilas, but we are trying to expand it. This has been done with support from Sweden and EU through one of our projects called Logic. And what this will help us do is actually allocate resources according to the vulnerabilities of those areas and not the other way around. And going forward, we will also be able to track the impact that this allocation of resources is making in these locations. So this is one way of actually making a bottom-up level linkages. We are also in the process of actually outscaling local climate financing frameworks. So tagging on to the national level climate fiscal framework, UNDP has already piloted some local climate financing frameworks as well in 2 or 3 upojilas. And again, through the Logic project, we are hoping to scale this out. Again, this serves as a top-down and bottom-up integration. And we are hoping that maybe in the next phase of the climate fiscal framework, we will be able to see the linkages of national budgetary allocation along with the local budgetary allocation. I would also actually like to touch very briefly upon private sector engagement. I think it's very important that when we think about public finance management or climate budget allocation going forward, especially with the LDC graduation, how do we actually think of leveraging our national climate budget and trying, how can we leverage what we have and try to mobilize or leverage further financing from the private sector? So UNDP is working on a range of innovative climate financing mechanisms, and I personally also think that this should be the way forward if we are trying to and hoping to mobilize this huge amount of financing that we need to attain all our kind of climate change commitments and goals. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maliha. Another excellent set of remarks. And I think that your point with regard to capacity building at the IMED to really measure and monitor climate-related projects is very important. What cannot be measured cannot be monitored, as we say. So, that's very well taken. The other point that you have mentioned about UNDP's work at the Upazila level, I think climate vulnerability index, designing those indexes and then relating financing with vulnerability. That will help really to target specific actions according to the needs of the localities. As we say, all developments are local. So that's but that will need both this bottom up and top down integration, but also scaling up of those 36 upazilas into national programs. And the point about private finance management, very rightly mentioned. Bangladesh is graduating out of the LDC group in November 2026. There will be a lot of changes in terms of the financing, climate-related financing that we are getting as least developed countries. There is a special fund, LDCF, for least developed countries, so which we will not be able to access after graduation. So obviously, financing issues will become more important as we go forward beyond 2026. Thank you, Dr. Maliha, for those very important points. I will now bring in Dr. Hasif Mohammad Irfanullah. As I said, he is a visiting research fellow at the Center for Sustainable Development at ULAB. And we look forward to hearing your perspectives on what has been said so far and also any new point, but within 7 to 8 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Since I am in the middle of the panel, so there is no scope or escape from many of the points that I was going to tell. Partho and Maliha has covered a few, but there is no loss in emphasizing or re-emphasizing certain points. Thanks, Famida Appa, for fantastic presentation, and she pointed out or presented 13 clear, specific recommendations. I will pick up 4 out of those 13. I will focus on very quickly structure of the budget, inclusion, tracking or monitoring, and accountability. Let me start with a very interesting fact. Over the last 8 years, our national budget grew by 2.6 times. But climate budget grew 3.1 times, which is fantastic, isn't it? But if we look into the structure, as you have seen that, and Partho Bhai also mentioned that it has been structured in terms of BCCSAP, Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan, which was formulated back in 2008, then revised in 9. But I think definitely it was revolutionary, যুগান্তকারী, কিন্তু এই যুগের অন্ত হওয়া দরকার। I'm not saying that out of disappointment that for the last 5 years we couldn't revise it. It has been running since 2018. So, and another point is there are certain activities which actually overlap, or they are supposed to be in the same cluster, but we segregate them. For example, under food security, social protection and health, we talk about adaptation to drought, salinity, submergence and heat. On the other hand, adaptation to flood cyclones fall under infrastructure. Since we are talking about transformation, we have to have themes which will be transformative, which will help us to measure that. So let us focus on nature-based solution as a theme and bring in conservation agriculture, sustainable management of resources, conservation, both in rural and urban areas. If we want to talk about climate governance, why we can't talk about locally led adaptation, the principles more than 100 countries and organizations have approved. When we talk about renewable energy and inclusive growth, why can't we bring in themes like green growth, where just transition should be one of the elements? When we talk about disaster management, why can't we bring in loss and damage aspect, which will help us not only disaster management, risk management, but also say disaster risk finance, shock responsive social protection, that sort of thing. So my first point is let us restructure our climate budget the way we see it. My second point is inclusive, how to make the budget more inclusive. Partho Bhai rightly mentioned quite a few things. And Maliha also mentioned about the Logic project. Yes, Logic project is ending or ended last month probably on paper. But before that, there were projects like CDMP, isn't it? Comprehensive Disaster Management. So we have 15 years of experience how to engage local government institutions, how to help them to plan, how to get the money and implement it. So why can't we, in our climate budget, not only where the money is going, rather where the money should go at union, Pৌরসভা, Upojela, and city corporation? Why can't we do that? Why we see only the segregation of budget as per divisions only in climate budget? And only it is about climate change trust fund only, not the whole budget. The other point of inclusion, if we look into the slide 16, you have got the printed copy. There are 25 ministries and divisions. Interestingly, nothing mentioned about youth ministry. It seems like youth are not involved, but all over the world for last 5 years, we are seeing and hearing activities how to involve the youth in the climate action. So the Department of Youth Development and the Ministry of Youth and Sports should be included in this budget. My third point is about tracking and monitoring. Yes, definitely we need to do that, and some suggestions have come up. And if you look into our climate budget, you will be seeing that there is a list of how much money is needed where. What about how much money we have received over the last 12 months and to implement which project or which plan? Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100, NAP is there, Bangladesh's National Adaptation Plan, NDC is there, Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan. So we shouldn't give the long list of 113 interventions. No, how much money we are getting, that is important, not how much money we are needing. The last point is accountability. Yes, IBUS plus could be expanded, but I think it will be really difficult. Well, one thing we can do, I was just thinking, for the last 8 years or 7 years, we are seeing climate budget in PDF form. And we are wait for that in the first week of June. Why can't we have our climate finance portal? We can bring in all the things we're talking about. It could be live, isn't it? We can bring in the private sector, INGOs, everything together in one place so that we will be able to know, are we overspending, underspending, or double counting anything? And since over the last 13 years, we have allocated $500 million in the name of Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund, we can spend a couple of crore taka, isn't it, to establish this portal? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Irfanullah. I think you have mentioned very concrete 5 points, very well taken, and the last point is very, I think, pertinent, the climate finance portal, which can be an answer to some of the issues that our previous two panelists also raised, and Dr. Fahmida also raised how to track climate financing from public finance management perspective. I think this is a very good suggestion. And also you have stressed disaggregation. One point that you have mentioned, I think, which is just not pertinent for today's discussion, but overall is accountability. I think that is a very important word because you rightly mentioned about overlaps and you know, repetitions. But as a student of economics, I know that you know, money is scarce and it has many alternate uses. So we have to find the, you know, the best possible use of money. So I think accountability is very important. Thank you very much for all those 5 points. I would now like to request Ms. Naoka Martinez Bäckström, who is First Secretary, Environment and Climate Change, Development Cooperation Section in the Embassy of Sweden. Your 7 to 8 minutes, please.
Thank you. It's amazing to be among distinguished experts like what we have here in the room today. And I represent Sweden, a long-time development cooperation partner to Bangladesh. So 51 years of cooperation, primarily on environmental issues, but over the last 2 decades on climate adaptation and mitigation. I also represent a country where we are actually happy to pay taxes. And I was thinking about that when Dr. Katun was doing her presentation, because for me, PFM means how am I going to communicate the decisions being made on the budget, the decisions being made on my taxes, communicate this back to the public, which will be channeled through media, and make the public understand that these decisions are for the development of society. So it can sound generalist, but at the end of the day, that is the ethos of PFM. Yeah. Now, from the experience of countries like Sweden, where PFM has had quite long traditions, it's a process that continues to be complicated because environmental and climate goals, they are so complex. And when you add the additional factor of having a collective decision making over budget allocation, you know, within a democratic system, then you understand that it's not so simple. But then the long-term effects of having a inclusive type of budgeting is there. Now, another thing that would be interesting to communicate out of this analysis is the fact that a number of budget measures contribute to several climate and environmental goals simultaneously. And that's important to note and to capture. So for example, if we invest in climate adaptive infrastructure, that has clear effects on sustaining livelihoods, on reducing climate-induced displacement, etc. Or when we make a decision about investing more on waste management, solid waste management, for instance, those have direct implications on reducing emissions and sustaining public health. An interesting issue as well from a public standpoint would be that certain budget measures could have the opposite effect to what we actually intend. So I remember this discussion we had in Sweden, which I was also involved with when we were discussing investments on wind farms. And the biodiversity people were so adamant about it. But when you have an evidence-based budget system, I mean, you end up making a decision that will eventually satisfy the public. So this brings me to, how we capture the evidence that you have very beautifully referred to, because this requires an investment, not just in the tracking, but also monitoring and ex post assessment or validation of the implications of this budget. And I know that in the EU, they're talking about how long do we actually track, how long do we, not track, but how long do we actually monitor the effects of this budget decision so that we can use this evidence to let's say, influence the next 5-year plan, etc. Now, I'm very pleased to say that Logic is getting into a bridging phase. It's 2 years, and the bridging phase is intended to actually institutionalize all the good experiences we have working with local governments to increase their capacities on proper climate adaptation allocation, and also with civil society that are and communities that are engaged there. One of the interesting instruments coming out of Logic is this performance-based climate resilience grants, which is actually strengthening the system for accountability and engaging people to actually not just be part of local climate planning, but also getting into this community auditing, which is what we would like to see more of. So you're not just auditing the performance of the local government, you're also auditing the performance of projects so that you know which decisions could be scaled up or replicated elsewhere. And finally, I want to end with the point that as Sweden and your development partner, we sit in the board of the GCF, for example, and that is also an area where we have a lot of these discussions on how to best channel and utilize climate finance for countries like Bangladesh. So we hope that we can use that relationship to be much more constructive and not just to complain about the need for, about the issue that it's so hard to access all these funds. I will stop there, and I'm very pleased to be part of this discussion. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ms. Beckstrom. Very happy to see someone who is happy to pay taxes. I think that's a very important point, that we will be happy if we know that the money that is that we are paying is being well spent. So that brings us to really bringing into public discourse that climate change actions are important. And if the money is spent in those areas, that's good for us. So I think that point, I take it in that spirit, what you have mentioned. And we know that Sweden is one of the pioneers in climate-friendly public finance management. And your second point about externalities is very important. all the development works that we do, they have positive externalities and also negative externalities. So if we can do our developmental works in a way that the spillover impacts and the externalities also have climate friendly implications, that is good value for money. If I am constructing an infrastructure, a road, in a climate resilient manner, then it has very important other positive implications. So that point is also, and as you have rightly mentioned, there are also unintended negative externalities which we will have to avoid. So on both those counts, I think your points are very well taken. Thank you very much. And I will now bring last but not the least, Dr. M. Asaduzzaman. Asad Bhai has been working in these areas when even I was young. So I think that we will learn from his wise words. I promised that I will give him more time. So I have mentioned 7 to 8 minutes to others. So Asad Bhai, I will mention 8 to 9 minutes for you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mustafiz. I'm honored that Sabir Bhai is the chief guest over here because he is also the eyes and ears of the Prime Minister in these issues. And as Mustafiz said in the beginning, hopefully some of the concerns that we are raising here, not myself, but also all others, Pamida, the other discussant and the flow that will be coming up, will ultimately be passed on to her, and she would be able to take an informed decision regarding how to go about it. Much of what Hamida has said, I more or less agree with it, not necessarily, not exactly in the same degree, but broadly the issues that needs to be discussed. And then quite a few of the points that has been raised by the fellow discussants are also very relevant. But one point which seems to have been touched very lightly by Pamida, but not so much by others, is the necessity of an overall legal and governance framework for climate change issues. Impact, mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage has been mentioned, and things like all of those. Now also climate change related disasters, both natural and man-made. There is, I believe, and I'll be coming to the updated BCC SAP later on, more in detail, but there is a need for creating that overall legal and governance framework, without which the climate finance is only one or perhaps almost the last part of it. What needs to be done, where to be done, for whom to be done, these need to be clarified. And that clarification in general must come from an act of the Parliament on climate change and its impact. They said there are policies, some of the legal frameworks in a way, but those are all partial, not integrated. As has been said by one of the discussants, that there are positive externalities and negative externalities, synergy and conflicts among the actions that are being taken. And the reason why it arises is not simply that even within the same ministry this may happen, but one ministry's actions may be countering the other ministry's actions. So these must be integrated together, coordinated together, and without an overall legal framework, act of the Parliament, this cannot be done. And the Ministry of Environment, when it was set up in sometime in 70s and there, the idea was that it would be looking into all of these things. But no, that is totally impossible. It can only do some sort of coordination at the policy level, but the actual actions are by the ministry. As Pamida has shown, one of the ministries or the set of ministries which had been involved in this is those related to food security and nutrition, things like that. That is very much well taken, because that had been one of the issues, major issues, and still remains a major issue. But do you know that we have come to know through talking to them, one of the food producing ministries, I would not name it, they are totally oblivious to the issues of climate change, what it might do to their output and their outcome, and also the nutritional outcome in the country. So there is a need for an overall legal and governance framework. This must be taken into account. And as Hasib had said, climate change, unless it is totally clarified, and he has mentioned and others also have mentioned the BCC SAP. It had in the beginning, 2008 and 9, 6 thematic areas. And when this was prepared, I was part of the process. We actually did it in a partly shadowy room, because not everything was clear at that time. Not even now totally all clear, but it is much clearer than before. And so we put things together. We could not separate those out, as Hasib had wanted that those should be separated out. Now this has been done. The updated BCC has been done. It started in 2018, as it said, but then came the COVID and all that, and a lot of work has been stalled. But ultimately it had been done, been given to the ministry. There had been certain comments and observations initially, those had been taken care of, then when given to the ministry. It's almost a year now, if I remember it clearly. Last year's August, it was given to the ministry, and this is the next month is the August. And for some reason or another, there had been certain problems somewhere in the whole process, and this has not yet been finalized. But that updated BCC SAP, of which I was, again, fortunately or unfortunately had been a part of the process, has 11 themes. Those themes, part of those are new themes which have been separated out. Like, let me tell you, the first one is which was not there initially. Natural resource management in a changing climate. And one of the issues that came up very strongly with the natural resource is water. And in fact, those who know about the Bali Action Plan in 2007, in the preparation of which I also again had some hand in that, we put it together that the water is the key for all climate change related actions. Because without water we would not live, and that water distribution within the country, either from rainfall or from groundwater or the surface water, is very uneven, and the qualities are also uneven. And that becomes the most important part, because ultimately that enters the food chain. Without water, no food can be produced. See? So water is the key, but then there are other natural resources which also needs to be looked into, and that had been more or less clearly spelled out in BCC SAP. Then the food and nutrition security had been kept on its own as a completely separate theme. But then health and well-being and social protection and gender had been separated out as independent themes. Industry and power had been put together, which was not there previously. Then the regional and urban dimensions of climate change. The regional issues looked into local government and all of those things. The way it has been done is that how you define the region is your practical issue. Whether you get it by division sometime, whether you get it by Upazila sometime, the Upazila governance, the climate vulnerability index, I had looked into that, though there are questions regarding how this has been done, but still there is a set of climate vulnerability index upajala by upajala. Even if it is not 100% correct, let us begin with that and see how we can further improve that if necessary. But we can begin work on that. Okay? So that is there. And then the urban dimensions. Urban areas, particularly the major metropolitan areas, have their own intrinsic environmental problems. And add on to that the climate change, and you get something much more bigger. See, so the urban areas may need to be looked into separately perhaps. Then of course, disaster, the comprehensive disaster management which was there. Infrastructure had been there, it had been but taken out somewhat from other places. The infrastructure included all other areas infrastructure together, but now this has been taken out. But the thing is, the basic issue is that we have tried to, in each theme, we have tried to show how this interacts with the other themes or a particular activity or program, so that one understands where the synergy, possible synergy and conflicts lie. So you can have an integrated program. Even if you have a project A, then you need to look at whether that other sector, other ministries, other areas have some interest in that. So you can put those in there. And when you are doing monitoring and evaluation, you have to look into those specific ones. Maybe you can have programs, practical areas of actions in terms of which ministry will be doing what, and then have the coordination in that. The climate finance will have to be allocated accordingly. See? So unless you have that basic framework, you cannot really allocate the financing part. Where the financing parts come from, that's a different issue. But then we have the last one, which had put it last but not the least again here, governance, legal, institutional, and policy aspects. And here, the issue of gender, I think Farah is here, perhaps I see. She was here. That the issue of gender has been taken out, in a sense taken out. It is part of social protection, but also it has been taken out as, should I say, as a running theme in practically all areas. That how to put that in, when you are doing the project planning, you have to understand exactly how you put it in. But the idea has to be there, the gender issue will have to be included. In fact, social inclusion is part of practically all of these themes. So it is not simply from the technical side, but also from the human side that you have to look into it. And the Fahmida referred to how the social welfare part of the climate financing had been going down, or not very adequate at all. So that part has been taken care of. But the other issue that I think needs to be looked into, some of these has been partly touched by others. Where do we get the finance from? The climate fiscal framework had been stated, okay? In 2020 it was done. That's a framework. How that has been put in effect? What had been the impact of that in terms of actual generation of resources? Have we put in the taxes in the right places? Have we put in the carbon tax and those? Have we looked into that, how we can do that? Have we looked into CDM process and those, that whether that can be used as for generation of resources? On the other side, have we put in subsidies or financial incentives in the right places? Yeah, particularly one issue, again it relates to water, and that's what I am coming to. We already have in this country a kind of payment for ecosystem services. The name may seem exotic, but we are actually, Bangladesh is actually practicing it. For 6 weeks or 8 weeks, you are banning hilsa fishing and spawn fishing, okay? That is, you are allowing the hilsa to come to its maturity. That is, and for that you are paying the fishermen. Maybe there are problems in those management, but in ideas and actual practice, a lot of it goes, is of paying the fishermen money, food, oil, edible oil, things like that. That is payment for ecosystem services. What they are losing in terms of their income by not fishing, you are trying to compensate them. Maybe not enough, but the idea is there. For water also it should be there. Particularly think about the groundwater extraction. not so much for surface, but groundwater extraction. We know that farmers say, one of the recent surveys that the Agriculture Ministry has done, which shows that farmers know they are overusing water. But the idea is, look brother, I am paying 2,000 taka, whether I get a little or little less or little more, so why do I bother? And my father and my grandfather had been doing this practice for all the time. I know we are using perhaps 30% more water. But if I want to look into practices like AWD or something like that, agronomic practices which lowers water use, why should I bother? But better to use that time and go to that tea shop and have look at the TV, and that is better time for me, because I have to pay the same money. But if we could induce the water sellers to accept or lower their charges, and so that we can tell the water buyers that you are now paying less, so please go into that less water using technology. But then the water seller loses. He has to be compensated for that loss, and that is again payment for ecosystem services, because and we have found through our experiments and modeling that at least 50% water can be saved. And that is, mind you, water is going to be the most stressed natural resource under climate change. So that is one thing that we have to look into. So that is, unless we understand that, that we cannot put that within the Ministry of Finance's thinking, that the climate fiscal framework also should look into this kind of payments and subsidies. Okay? So these kinds of financial incentives they have to look into. So these gaps in understanding of climate change, and mind you, everybody has been talking about climate. It is not climate, it is climate change. And mind you, climate change means, and then the last thing, what I heard yesterday from one of the agriculture scientists, I had been to Gazipur yesterday to the Agriculture Research Institute, and I happened to meet one of the rice scientists. And he had been looking into the rice blast issue. And he told me that the climate change is going to create havoc for rice blast, because at certain, as the temperature level goes up, and mind you, climate change means trend rise in temperature. As it goes up, the incidence of rice blast will be higher. And that means already 3% of our production output goes out of, we do not get that because of the rice blast. And if it goes another 3%, the food security is up in the air. So that is the kind of thing and that we are facing. So it is climate change, not just climate, because climate had been, what climate we have or we had been experienced by our father and grandfathers, but not us. Us and our children and their children will be facing climate change, which is going to be far more distressful. And one of the things that Mustafiz has mentioned, we are going out of LDC status by 2026, is that? And after that, you don't get any concessional funding, perhaps, for anything. And that means we have to look to ourselves. Somebody said, I'm paying taxes. We have to pay more taxes. How do we pay that tax? That we will have to look into. How do we get money from outside? And then if we get money from outside GEF, I know that there had been many project ideas put up to GEF which had been rejected precisely because those had been very much inadequately prepared. Okay? People do say that, oh, there are so many rigorous things that they want. But I said, when I looked into some of those, I said, these are all standard economic issues that any project planning should do. That means that the capacity building at the human skill level is also very inadequate. Unless we can do that, for the future, getting money from outside is also going to remain a pipe dream. So we will have to look into not simply climate finance or climate change finance. But before that, a lot of things needs to be done. And as I said in some other statement somewhere, that Bangladesh does not need to do any more new thinking. Whatever we have thought about is enough. Put those together, add those together, have a coordinated legal framework, and then we can proceed further. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Asad Bhai. I think you have taken a bit more time, but every minute and every second of that was well justified. Now looking back, I can assure our audience. Thank you very much. You have mentioned about legal and governance framework. I think Saber Bhai can react to that, because that is something which they will have to decide. But some of the very practical aspects of our discussion on climate change and public finance management that Dr. Asaduzzaman has said is very important. And I think relating our discussion to agriculture, agriculture production, food and nutrition security for us and our next generation, I think that linkage is so important. And you have mentioned very rightly about subsidies and incentives, and how we can de-subsidize and de-incentivize, and subsidize and incentivize. So from both these aspects, budgetary decisions are very important. And you have mentioned about the fishermen and the support that the government gives when they are not fishing during the season. I think that's a very good example which can be replicated. One point that came to my mind, and Dr. Maliha also mentioned about, and you have also mentioned about this localization, and but I was thinking whether, from the climate change perspective, when we talk of localization, is it should it be related to our administrative zoning, or from ecological, climatological, zoning? That question came to my mind, because climate, impacts may not follow administrative, boundaries. So maybe. And the other point that came to my mind is you mentioned about water. Water means rivers, and rivers means also, I think, cross-border coordination. I think that is also one aspect that came to my mind, whether you can really address some of the issues within national boundaries. And I think cross-boundary coordination is also very important. But thank you so much, Asad Bhai, for those suggestions. I think our special guest and chief guest can also react to that, and our DG Bangladesh Water Development Board is also here. I will bring him at one point, but now is open floor discussion, language of choice. বাংলা ইংরেজি যেটাতে আমরা কমফোর্টেবল মনে করি আমরা সেইভাবে বলতে পারি, বাট একটা আপনি এখনই বলতে চান? ঠিক আছে, আপনি বলেন। সো আমরা কিন্তু খুবই সংক্ষেপে বলতে হবে আমাদের, তারপরে আমরা আমাদের স্পেশাল গেস্ট অ্যান্ড চিফ গেস্টকে আমরা আনবো। সো যদি আপনারা খুব কংক্রিটলি এবং সাজেশনের ভিত্তিতে বলেন। থ্যাংক ইউ।
Thank you, sir. I am Ramjan Ali Pramanik. I am DG of Bangladesh Water Development Board. Thanks for giving me to tell something. Actually, Bangladesh Water Development Board under Ministry of Water Resources, we are facing a problem due to climate change, and this affects directly on water. Due to climate change, and there are sedimentation, and our raining pattern also change. and our river, khal, there are deposition, and we have taken climate change, climate trust fund from 2009 to 2010, 14 years, we have 136 projects. But you know that our financing system is very much transparent. There is a accounting office other than our engineer's office. They are checking, and our climate trust fund from Environment Ministry, they are checking our projects also. But one thing, now we are taking less funding from this trust fund. It is not sufficient to implement our projects, because you know our riverbank protection projects and other river excavation and khal excavation projects, it requires minimum 200 crore or 100 crore taka, but we are getting 5 crore taka only in this year. 5 projects is there. So I request to implement to giving more funds in our sector, because you know our food security, our other facilities like education, communication, all depends on our water development board's embankment. After construction our embankment, other departments are there, and food security also depends on our embankments. We have seen during the after Aila, they are demanding only to restore our polder, not any support from our government. So today, climate budget and recommendations for climate public finance management in Bangladesh. So I will request to more funding in our departments in water ministry, and we will give assurance that our accounting system is very much transparent. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pramanik, for sharing some of government's plans and also the need for more financing. And very happy to hear that you have mentioned about accountability in spending, which is so important, just not for this discussion, but overall. এরপরে জি প্লিজ আপনার পরিচয়টা দিয়ে দেন প্লিজ।
Sure. So Farzana Mustafa, Climate Change and Environment Advisor from the British High Commission. So I have a couple of points. I'll be quick. So one on the recommendations, some great recommendations came from the presentation, and they're quite wide in depth. I was wondering whether CPD has one or two crunchy, specific recommendations that can be taken forward. We have 2 MPs here today. You know, is there something that can be done instantly or on a more immediate basis? Because some of the recommendations, like public finance reform, is going to take time. But are there things that can be done, small tweaks, low-hanging fruits, that can bring in good results? So that's one point. Number 2 is on the analysis. You've obviously covered a good point around accessing international climate finance. While there are some big funds in the international arena, we all know how difficult it is to access those finance. I mean, take GCF, for example, how long it takes to have a proposal ready and then approved. The UK, following COP26, the UK has set up a climate finance task force, and Bangladesh is one of the countries where basically we are helping government to fast track accessing those finance. But that's just one mechanism. But it's just we need to get together thinking how actually the accessing international finance can be mainstreamed. Linked to that is loss and damage fund. So while there are international funds, but we could also make use of our national funds. Again, take BCCTF for instance. It could very well be spent on loss and damage initiatives as well. And finally, I think coordination amongst ministries is extremely important, and I think we've kind of missed the political economy in this analysis and the spending ability. So having finance is, having budget is one thing, but how we actually also improve and strengthen our ability to spend those funds effectively is another question. And finally, I would say that it wasn't entirely clear to me whether we are also ensuring when we are mainstreaming climate finance, whether we are practicing do no harm approach, because the example you have shared on the agriculture ministry, you know, that was completely doing the opposite thing using climate finance. So do we actually have the do no harm approach in our budgeting? If not, can we include that? Is that something doable in the short run? Thank you.
Thank you very much. All the 3 points are very well taken, and we do look forward to accessing the fund that you have mentioned, the UK fund, and we hope that it will not be as time consuming as the other funds. That's very important.
And also that it's not being withdrawn.
No, I see, not being. Okay. Yes, I will bring everyone. Atik Bhai.
Thank you. Nice to be here and nice to see all of you after 2 years of gap in the COVID world. So great pleasure. The critical issue of water linked to climate change, the other name for climate change is water. Too much water flood, too little water drought. And our agricultural vulnerability is such that water remains one of the most critical point. And water is connected for distributional purposes to rain, which gives the water in the upstream, and we get it through the rivers and our ecosystem. Of course, we get vertical fall of water as rain across the country. But being a small country geographically and big in terms of population, we have a variety of ecosystems which are vulnerable to the ecosystemic contribution of water, particularly through rain and lack of rain. So the food security issues of Bangladesh is connected to that, and the water security and the rest is connected to natural distribution, which is part of the climate change phenomenon. Now, as we know that we have a high population, we do contribute to climate change, but very little in terms of per capita basis compared to the industrialized country or global world as such. So there is a imbalance in two different ways. On the other hand, the impact does not distinguish the rich and the poor. Is the natural system through the water mechanism that distributes and attributes our capacity to develop and grow. Nonetheless, as a Bangladeshi, I am proud that a lot of good things have been happening. Particularly, our farmers have been doing wonders in a very challenging set of circumstances, and they are responding to it. We do not have absolute food shortage in terms of carbohydrates that we get mostly from rice and wheat, and those of us who have been following the food habits and needs of their structural system, there has been an increasing amount of wheat entering our food system in proportion as well as in absolute numbers. So rice and wheat are the two major suppliers, but others are vegetables and legumes and all. So without going further more into detail, is climate vulnerability remains one of the greatest challenge, and we have to manage that challenge. What we need to go one step back is the better understanding the science of it as it is relates and relevant to Bangladesh ecosystems, and accordingly we have to create our institutional and intellectual structure. Intellectual structure more into the research community, universities and NGO, civil society, others, and the institutional system within the government, particularly in the localized Upazila system. We have to put issues as far low in the decision-making process, and Upazila is our lowest and most effective decision-making process. Let me stop there.
Thank you. That was Dr. Atiq Rahman, one of our leading environmental scientists and researchers in the country, and he is the Executive Director of Bangladesh Center for Advanced Studies, BICAS. Yes, please. I'll bring, yeah.
Thank you very much. I see my microphone is not...
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. My name is Hartmut Behrendt. I'm working here for the GIZ for preparing a project leader for preparing a partnership between Bangladesh and Germany on climate and development. I simply wanted to express that I brand new arrived here, and I'm deeply impressed how far Bangladesh is already in climate budgeting, how far Bangladesh is in all the policies on climate change. I never saw it in another country, and I saw many countries in this world. So I'm very excited to work. What I would like to point out is that the need for climate funding, for climate finance, is increasing quickly, and 80% of the funding is in private hands, 20% is in public hands. So we heard this, the presentation in the beginning, that the public budget is for sure a catalyst, but I think we have to go much deeper into the financing from the private sector, and also in the new subject of green banking. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Bangladesh, and we do look forward to a partnership with the GIZ. Yes, please.
Sorry,
Thank you.
I'm Torin Zaman from International Center for Climate Change and Development. So I would like to make 3 points. Firstly, Dr. Hasib Irfanullah has already talked about reframing the discussion around how the BCSC CSAP 6 themes can be reframed. And I think loss and damage is it's the discourse around disaster management. This theme should be reframed, and with loss and damage as the main focus, because loss and damage is now an integral and inevitable part of disaster management. World Bank has forecasted that only from cyclones, only 1 million economic loss per year will be happening in Bangladesh. So it's important that we analyze the climate finance and budget with loss and damage as a main theme. Secondly, as for integrating the local sources of budgeting, we recently spoke to Finance Division, and I would like to commend them that they're planning to actually bring in all the city corporation budgeting systems under one framework, so that they can utilize better funding, finance, and resources coming from the local sources like city corporations. So that's a good step in for the future. Thirdly, it's a pity that the allocation for research and knowledge management is very low. Like Nayoka always said, evidence-based budget is very important. Evidence generation is very important for our country, because we have to go to the foreign donors and actually ask them to bring in money for us. So and the best way to do that would be through scientific evidence. So I think it's important that we increase the allocation for research and knowledge management. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was someone from here. I will bring. Acha.
Should I continue?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think I will add three small points. Well, my first point is well mentioned by Dr. Asaduzzaman and
Introduce
also
yourself and then.
my name is Ghulam Rabbani. I am head of the Climate Bridge Fund Secretariat at BRAC. My first point is, it has been mentioned by Dr. Asaduzzaman and also Dr. Maliha. I strongly feel that IMED needs to be very well equipped in terms of monitoring and evaluation of these climate change related projects. If you look back, if you see the National Adaptation Plan, it talks about like we need $8.5 billion per year to address climate resilience actions. And out of this 8.5 billion, we depend on, on the international climate finance sources for 6 billion. If it is that, and the second other point is one of the three major criteria to get international climate finance is the monitoring and evaluation. So it is very important that we put money, we put budget to well equip this, IMED to ensure this monitoring and evaluation exercise. That's number one. Number two is I'm a bit concerned about the decrease of budget on the comprehensive disaster management, because I strongly remember, when I was in Monshigans of Shatkhira in a group discussion, and they were saying, you don't need to come here. You just make sure that this embankment and the polders are well constructed, repaired, and then, we are bit protected from these storm surges. So that's the second point. My third point is in terms of budget tracking, perhaps we need to include this, joint stock company and also the University Grant Commission, because some resources also come through this joint stock company, University Grant Commission, and definitely through the private sectors. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Unju from the World Bank. I work with the environment sector and my colleagues here at the end of the table as well. This is very useful for me to understand, and it's been I commend really the kind of work that's been analyzed. I want to make a couple of points here, and I'm going to speak directly to the recommendations and a little bit more deeper into the practicalities. A lot of good points have been raised about transforming the narrative, moving beyond the word climate, and looking at the sectoral effect and how is that going to affect the economy. And we have to also understand that the do no harm aspect is that the current economic growth of Bangladesh has led to quite a lot of pollution. The pollution alone, and also I commend the agricultural production, but this is coming at the cost of much more fertilizer use and indiscriminate use of different feed types that not necessarily are very healthy either in the food systems. This compiled with climate change, warming, water, chemistry changes, ecology changes, are making huge dire effects. So then if we look at all of this, I really like the comments about thematic coordination. We no longer can make an allocation by ministry, by division, by sector, because this does not create collaboration of a solution. For example, solid waste management. The country must tackle this in a very collaborative, multi-ministry manner. Otherwise, we cannot have solution. But if the allocations continue to be by ministry, we cannot get any growth, number one. Secondly, on the financial structure itself, I work with a number of ministries in Bangladesh, and they work very hard. There's not enough staff. Finance division has to increase the number of staff or increase or add to the number of institutions and certain roles of his institutions who can then authorize different actions. So there's not enough staff, there's not enough manpower, women power in the government structure itself. So when we have a review of documents, it can take 3 months, 2 months. There's just not enough process. And it is true that GCF and other processes are difficult, but we don't add to it here because we have low human capacity, numbers and others. And this is something that Finance Division has continuously cut, not really increased. If you look at the Department of Environment, we are at 500 staff members for a country of 165, 70 million people. That is unheard of, and we cannot blame, in this case, the Department of Environment for not tracking and monitoring. It is unheard of, nor do we have a huge uptake of technology monitoring or pushing of that at this moment. We're getting there, but we just don't have enough staff. So Finance Division has to make a commitment. The climate allocation should actually go into staffing and people within the government. Third point is on indicators. This comments about monitoring indicators are wonderful. However, if you have spent X money, what has that gotten you? How many things have we produced? Has that affected? I see the very good discussion on allocation and tagging. That's great. Whether it decreased in a sector or not, we don't know what the impact of that is. So the question is, what is the indicator and the target? So I think we should start out with the target. If we are losing lives, and if the economy is going down in Shatkhira because of climate warming, then we should have a target of X% growth in Shatkhira and why those people should have better cost of living at X amount. Climate change funding should go for those kind of metrics, and those are the metrics we should be tracking. My suggestion. And last but not least is when we look at ministries are de-incentivized to work harder. The current system is that if they make any revenue, whether that's cost recovery, they cannot reinvest in their ministry or upgrade their capital expenditure. So the finance division has to come up with a way to incentivize ministries to get better, not worse. Right now, ministries are de-incentivized to work harder, bare minimum. And I think the Hirsha ban is very important, sir, but the country is more than one fish. You have many other fish in this country that can be a huge economic access and also production. However, their focus is only on Hirsha. Why? Because the geopharma fisheries is lowly underfunded and understaffed. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all the 4 points, very practical points. Please, yeah. Bolan.
থ্যাংক ইউ আমার নাম মোহাম্মদ আব্দুল কাদের আমি জগন্নাথ বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ের ভূগোল ও পরিবেশ বিভাগের চেয়ারম্যান I want to bring surface one thing that is climate justice. So the actions, climate actions that we are taking as a nation, Bangladesh is in a big, great climate injustice and globally. But here within the Bangladesh, we are taking a lot of actions. The climate actions are being taken, but this can create a injustice for the vulnerable people. So our aim is to decrease the vulnerability, but climate actions may increase the vulnerability by increasing the climate injustice. So for example, that was mentioned in the keynote speech that 47 new buffer warehouse is going to be built that will to facilitate the fertilizer distribution for increase the agriculture. If it will degrade the environment, then a lot of vulnerable people will also, their vulnerability will be increased. So now we need the coordinated effort. We have done a lot of wonderful things in Bangladesh in disaster management. Say for example, CPP, UDMC. So in each union, this is the wonder. I don't know any other example in the world that they have a union level fantastic organization that can act promptly at the union level, but they do not have any climate targeted budget. Even they do not have 100 taka to spend to make a rally or something like that. But if you look at the SOD, Standing Order on Disaster, it's a fantastic organization starting from the Honorable Prime Minister until to the Union Parishad member or chairman. So for the climate change, we need such kind of organization or such kind of system so that it can be tracked, it can be monitored, that whatever the money is, but this is coming from our taxes, so it can be accountable at the grassroots level. That will be helpful to coordinate all of the. We have enough policies. Now we need only one thing, that is coordination, coordination, and coordination. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will continue. I can see 2, 3, 4 hands, 5 hands, but our chief guest has a very important meeting and he will have to leave now. So I will now request Mr. Saber Hossain Chaudhary, our chief guest, to share his views, but we will continue even when you are gone.
Thank you, Professor Mustafizur Rahman. And it's not good to start with an apology, but that's what I have to do because I had planned. In fact, it's related to the discussion we are having today. So there is a coordination meeting between the Secretaries of Finance, ERD, and Environment. And so that.
We also promised that we will
finish by 1 o'clock.
so
Yeah, but
within
still, I mean, when
hour
we are
of
here.
apology,
No, no.
not yours.
So let me first thank CPD. And every time I plan to come to an event, I come here basically because I think the clarity, the insights, the analysis, and the statistics that are provided are really useful. We have talked about this connection between, or the nexus between science, data, evidence, statistics, and policy. And I think this is an area where CPD contributes enormously. So, and I think today we were not disappointed by the very high standards that they set. I think today also it has been to our expectation, perhaps even beyond. And what these events actually do is they are not really designed to provide answers to all of the questions. Rather, I think, at least in terms of how I respond to it, they allow us to frame the right questions. I think that is very important. We shouldn't just all jump and seek answers, but the framing of the questions are important. I think that has been done. Let me perhaps start with the context. What is the context for these discussions? And as our distinguished moderator has stated, the focus is on management. And management in context of climate change, and then we are looking at public finance. So management, in fact, there are various aspects to it. I don't need to go into it. But one of the aspects which we have perhaps not touched upon or emphasized as much as we should is the funding gap for Bangladesh. We talk about efficiency, we talk about we have to focus on gender, youth, absolutely right. We have to factor in the critical importance of water. No disagreements there. But what does Bangladesh need for climate finance? How much is being provided by Bangladesh government? And what is being provided externally? That is really where I start. So before I look at allocations, I look at the adequacy of funding. So both begin with A, but this is very important because we are talking about a management without any context to what is actually available in terms of resources. And to understand what resources we need, we have to have a proper assessment of the needs. Now, when we are trying to look at a proper assessment, an objective assessment of needs, we are talking about a moving goalpost. All of the figures that we have here, 230 billion that Bangladesh needs for its national adaptation plan between now and 2050, are based on what? Temperatures rising by 1.1 degrees Celsius. That is nowhere near the reality that we have today. In the words of the UN Secretary General, is the road to climate hell. And we are looking at 2.4, 2.5. So all of the figures that we have, you can just set it aside and look at a completely new reality. So that is something we have to understand, because this is not a problem which is static. It is a changing scenario, it is dynamic, and of course for us, in the wrong manner. Dynamic in a very negative way, not in any positive way. So what is the amount of resource we are going to need if temperature increase is going to be 2.4 or 2.5? And we also know that when we are trying to look at the future, we cannot simply rely on past trends. Past trends are no indication of what will happen in the future. I know the UN DESA is looking at a new concept where they talk about foresight. So you use AI, you try and factor in other things, and then you try to look at a scenario as to what. So we have to apply foresight when it comes to climate change. And once we have determined our needs, we can really talk meaningfully about our requirements, the framework that we have in place. Is it fit for purpose? Does it actually deliver as we want it to deliver? And there, all of these things that you have discussed today, I agree, it should be a thematic approach. Climate change is cross-cutting. There is no sector of the economy which is not being touched in one way or the other by climate change. We have not even talked about displacement. And the World Bank says by 2050, 1 in every 7 Bangladeshis will experience displacement because of climate change. How do you put that in terms of cost? And then when we talk about public sector and the private sector, there is no private sector investment because private sector is driven by the bottom line, profit. Where is the profit when you invest in adaptation? You cannot monetize adaptation. So to talk about private funds coming in, I think yes, we can talk about it, but actually it will not come. And Bangladesh, even in the current budget, with all of the limitations, the ministerial approach, 25 ministries, not capturing private finance, just looking at the Bangladesh Climate Change Action and Strategy Plan, still you're talking about an allocation of $3 billion that Bangladesh has allocated for climate change. That's huge. And someone mentioned here climate justice. The other dimension of climate justice is that we are being forced to choose between priorities. That money could go to health. That money could go to education. That money can go to infrastructure. That can go to science and technology and research. But we are having to invest in climate change. How unfair can you get? And then, how much has actually come through? Funding gap. 2017, $6 billion. 2020, $7 billion. 2025 projected $9 billion. 2030 projected $12 billion. And the cost keeps going up. Why does it keep going up? And not just climate. And I'm not, this is not the blame game, because I don't think it's a question of us and them, or we and them. It's a question of all of us together. The SDGs, we referred to it today, were underfunded from day one. $2.4 trillion was the shortfall in SDGs. And now, of course, it has probably gone up to 4.5 or 5. So when people talk about the war in Ukraine, they talk about COVID, I'm brutally honest and candid. And I say, look, friends, the money did not flow when times were good. And now you are saying that we have this problem and that problem. We also know that the money is there. Look at the size of the global economy. There is money available when a bank, a financial institution, gets into a crisis. There is enough money available to fund the war in various parts of the world. But when it comes to what we refer to as an existential challenge of climate change, funds are not available. So really we need to, and I'm saying this because we have, I think, a make or break opportunity with COP28 coming up. COP28 will decide whether we can still talk in terms of an international community, whether there is global solidarity. And we thank all of you around the table because, in your own way, you are trying to contribute. And we don't refer to you as donors, we refer to you as partners. Because you are our development partners, you understand our aspirations. But unless, and this is really the important point, unless we are able to solve the problem of climate change faster than we are creating it. So just watch my words. We have to solve climate change faster than we are creating it. If we don't do that, then whatever allocations are made are actually going to be inadequate. We can't be talking about continuing emissions, investing in fossil fuel, and then talk about adaptation and building resilience. Counterproductive, suicidal. So we need to get serious about climate change. And I don't think the world is as serious as it should be or as the science demands. We refer to ourselves as climate vulnerable. It's a question of when, not if, that all countries of the world are going to be climate vulnerable. So what is happening to Bangladesh today will happen to all the other countries in the world, and we must understand that. So of course, there are areas of improvement, and I take on board the comments that have been made. So we welcome this because business and life still goes on. We will fight for finance internationally. We'll fight to reduce emissions. And of course, we will try to do our part when it comes to the widening trust gap. You know, we talk about adaptation gaps, funding gaps. There's also a trust gap because pledges and promises that are made are not honored. So when we sit and we talk about, we are going to do this, we tend to believe you less. When I say you, I mean the international community, because previous pledges have not been met. So that is also a very major constraint. How do we do that? Yes, Bangladesh, we can say that in terms of our capacity to utilize climate funding, we are ahead of the curve. And our Honorable Prime Minister is very clear. We want to be a leader in global thought and action when it comes to climate change. Not just thought, but also in action. So this is all part of those actions. We want to increase our capacity. No one has actually mentioned data and statistics. To what extent is it disaggregated? To what extent is it live? I cannot be talking about a budget in 2023 with data and statistics which relate back to 3 or 4 years. And one of the most important areas for us to focus on when we are talking about public fund management is outcomes, is impacts. So the exercise today, the presentation, and it's extremely useful because this is the first phase, has actually done it in quantitative terms. How much money is spent, how much is allocated, what is it a percentage of the total budget, what is it a percentage of the 25 ministries who are spending the money, but what is the impact I get out of it? And that has been a challenge in terms of Bangladesh and also many other countries. So it's not just how much money has been allocated, how much has been spent. How do we monitor, how do we quantify the actual impact that has been caused? Yes, having indicators could be one option. So really that leads me to the other point which came up. And that is, are we looking at changes in the existing public finance management? Are we looking at adapting, or are we looking at a recast? That is a very important policy question for us to ask. And if we are really going to look at it through the lens of climate change, and it's not just Bangladesh, many other countries, and I'm speaking very frankly, the Ministry of Environment, Bangladesh, a lot of other countries which I'll not name, is in the periphery of government. It doesn't drive the process. Finance should not be driving it. Finance can take the requirements from the various ministries. So we have water resources, we have agriculture, we have fisheries, and then finance does the, so who is going to be in the driving seat of climate finance is also a very important part. So I see that as part of the overall, I don't want to use the term reform because as I've said, we want to be a leader in global thought and action. This is going to be Bangladesh's contribution to the world. In terms of how we respond to climate change, not just in terms of what we are doing at the community level, not just in terms of adaptation locally, community-based adaptation, but also in terms of how we enhance our capacity and our capabilities, because this is how we actually do it. And we as public representatives, our job is to make sure that we get the maximum bang out of $1 spent. So for that, I really need to know what are the alternatives, what is the opportunity cost, where am I putting the money? And I'm not sure all of that analysis is actually available for us. So I think one of the important areas is going to be capacity building, institutional knowledge. You don't want someone who is really working well at the Ministry of Finance to go and then all the knowledge goes with him. What is the knowledge that is actually left in the Ministry of Finance as a legacy, as an institutional memory that takes this forward? So I think these are all challenges, and I welcome the challenges because they've arisen because Bangladesh has taken those first steps to look at public finance management. If we had not taken this step, and I'm proud that Bangladesh was one of the few countries that has done this, we would not have actually realized that these are the challenges we have. So now we need to turn that into opportunities. And I think what we will try to do, and hopefully we will see, is there'll be better coordination, especially between environment and Ministry of Finance and all of the other ministries that are important. We have a number of plans. You know, we have the Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan, we have the Delta Plan, we have our graduation coming up. So I think it is very important, and I think the point was made by Mr. Partho earlier on. We need to have a coordinated plan out of all of these plans, where we actually sequence our priorities, because otherwise we will get lost. You know, 28 outcomes, 111, 114 areas. So we really need to have something that we all know. And the Delta Plan, yes, it's important, but I think it's more strategic, because how we perform with the Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan is going to be important in terms of shaping how we respond to the Delta Plan of 2100. So I think that's also maybe one area. And which the sequencing is important, because which action is going to give us the maximum impact, create the most synergies, and also the momentum in terms of the subsequent interventions. So I think these are all very important. And if I may say in Bangla, মানে আপনার বিশেষ করে যারা আপনারা এখানে এসেছেন, যে দেখেন আমরা জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনকে আমরা বলি এটা আমাদের একটা অস্তিত্বের সংকট, এটা একটা অস্তিত্বের লড়াই, আমরা বলি ইটস অ্যান এক্সিস্টেন্সিয়াল চ্যালেঞ্জ, বাট দ্যাট হ্যাজ টু, এটার কিন্তু একটা প্রতিফলন আমরা আমাদের প্রতিটা নীতিতে দেখতে চাই। সো আমরা যেটা চাই সেটা হচ্ছে আমাদের যে মানে অর্থনৈতিক সমৃদ্ধি বলেন আর যা কিছুই বলেন, এটা কিন্তু নির্ভর করছে এখন জলবায়ুর বিষয়টা আমরা কিভাবে মোকাবেলা করি। এখন কথার কথায় যদি আমাদের ক্ষতি জলবায়ুর কারণে আমার জিডিপির 9% হয়, যেটা অনেকে আশঙ্কা করছে যে 2050 সালের মধ্যে এটা হবে, আর আমার প্রবৃদ্ধি যদি হয় 6, 7 বা 8, আমি কিন্তু নেগেটিভ গ্রোথের মধ্যে চলে যাচ্ছি। সো আমাকে এই বিষয়টা আমাকে মাথায় রাখতে হবে, আমার পরিবেশের ক্ষতি কত হচ্ছে, আমার জলবায়ুর ফলে আমাদের ক্ষতিটা কী হচ্ছে। The understanding of the needs is very, very important. We have talked about transboundary, and also there was this interesting proposition about doing no harm. You know, I was just looking at, for all of your references, I'm sure you know this, but there's a SDG dashboard which has just been released, right? So Bangladesh has actually done well. 4 goals: SDG 4, quality education; SDG 12, responsible production consumption; SDG 13, climate change. Bangladesh is actually on track, which is amazing, because if you look at other reports, there is either stagnation or there is regression in the SDGs. So despite all of these challenges, although that is primarily because of mitigation and our investment in renewable energy, but still we have met that goal. So that is huge. And the other, our moderator mentioned spillover in context of within Bangladesh. You know, if you look at it in a regional context, Bangladesh is ranked 46th on the spillover index. That means, what does that mean? That means we are significantly more positive and there are fewer negative impacts on neighboring countries. So this thing of doing no harm, I think, you know, Bangladesh has done very well. Of course, if you look at something like air pollution, and this is not a question of India or Bangladesh, 30%, 35% of the air pollution in Dhaka is caused by air pollution in West Bengal of India. And that is just how the wind blows. So we need to have a transboundary approach, because what is good for West Bengal in terms of air quality is going to be good for Bangladesh. And likewise, if you look at the Punjab region in Pakistan, they are responsible for air pollution of Punjab in India. So on the one side, you know, India is the donor, we are the recipient.
in the context of Pakistan, India, Pakistan is the donor and India is the recipient. So we have to have a regional approach. I think that's what I'm saying. And I think that is also very, very important. What I would like, and and let me say this on a lighter note, the fact that I'm the chief guest today means that I can actually leave early and give the responsibility to the special guest to wind up the proceedings. So, and I have suffered enough. I've been in events where the chief guest has left and has asked me to wrap up. So today, my parliamentary colleague will have the pleasure and privilege of doing that. What I would like is for CPD to actually make a summary of all of the recommendations. If some of you want to go back, maybe we can take a few days, because there's a lot of knowledge and there's a wealth of experience around the table, and we want to leverage that as much as possible. And what we will then do is, from the Ministry of Environment, we will have an interaction with the Ministry of Finance. First, we have to be convinced that these are the right initiatives. So we will do that, and we will engage with finance and try and see how we can come up with implementing some of the ideas that have come across. So again, my apologies, but I hope you will excuse me, because this is also a very important meeting. We have, of course, COP coming up. Prior to that, we have the Climate Summit in New York. There's also an IMF team which is going to be interacting with us, led by their DMD on the 14th, I believe. So we really need to coordinate positions so that there's a Bangladesh country position rather than a Ministry of Finance position and a Ministry of Environment position. So I think that's a good enough reason, and if you will excuse me, I'll take my leave. Let me thank CPD, Professor Mustafiz, for his excellent moderation, which he will continue, and I'm sure the lunch that he will dish out in terms of the tax that they are paying for today's event will be something that you will enjoy, and also Dr. Fahmida Khatun for the excellent presentation. So I wish you continued deliberations, and we look forward to the interactions as we go forward. Thank you. Joy Bangla, Joy Bangabandhu.
Thank you, Saber Bhai, for staying with us for so long. We do appreciate the comments and observations that you have made, and also we know that you are a thought leader not only in the country but also in the context of the Climate Summit and the COP28 also. You'll be playing a very important role. So we look forward to your contribution to safeguarding and securing and advancing our interests in these areas. So thank you very much. We will continue. We have some other participants from the audience who wanted to share their thoughts. Yes, sir, please.
Thank you, Bhaiya, for giving me the floor. I am Mr. Sharmin Akun from World Vision Bangladesh, working as a National Coordinator, Climate Change Adaptation. I have a small suggestion. We know agriculture is one of the largest greenhouse gas emission sector which contributes to climate change in various ways, mostly fertilizer application when we grow paddy and other vegetable crops. But to overcome these issues, we are promoting organic fertilizer, which are mainly made up from kitchen waste and also many other herbal things. But we have seen our Ministry of Agriculture put highest allocation of budget around 95% to 47 new buffer warehouse for fertilizer distribution and other things. My question is, where we are promoting, motivating our community to use organic fertilizer to reduce the impact of climate change, but our government has allocated most of the budget to do this fertilizer distribution and other things. How actually we are looking into this issue in considering the climate change issues? Yes, thank
Thank
you.
you for. Ji, quickly.
Very quickly, what you have said, the last discussion, what you have said is not exactly correct. It is not fertilizer. It is methane due to overuse of water, continuously flooded rice agriculture that we have. And this I referred to, that how we can reduce this water use in my deliberation when I stated that. That is one thing. But it is not totally, you are not totally wrong. Fertilizer is also responsible, but not that much. So this will have to be again that issue of synergy and conflict, exactly where we would draw the line, that will have to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Asad Bhai, for that clarification. Yes, please. Yeah. Apne ke pore anchi ji.
This is A.M. Nasiruddin from ActionAid Bangladesh. I am manager for disaster risk reduction in the organization. And thank you, CPD, for this nice event. And after hearing from the presenter and the distinguished panelist, my point is, if we can ensure a robust data ecosystem for monitoring and observing the progress, as well as to understand the scenario, that will actually provide us the information or base for further thinking in climate change public finance management, which is very important. And to do that, we have to consider the participation of the people at risk from the ground to the top level. Otherwise, the participation of the at-risk people and the policymakers will not be ensured. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm Dilruba Haider from UN Women. Just wanted to make a few very small points. One is, Famida Appa, you mentioned about climate change and gender action plan, which needs to be revised. Just wanted to inform that it's actually been revised already, and the final draft is with the Ministry of Environment and Forest, and the interministerial meeting actually happened on April. So the final draft with the feedback and all that is already with the ministry now. So we are hoping that it will be approved anytime, very soon. Also, I mean, I think one of the, now it's important that we implement the climate change and gender action plan. We are, in the document, in the revised document, we have actually tried to show the synergy between NAP and CCGAP, so that when the government is planning for the implementation of NAP, the government could take into account the gender aspects, taking note and cue from the CCGAP document. The final point I wanted to say is about this social safety net program and the need for increasing investment into that. Also I see that in your presentation, you have showed that MOCA is getting a lot of funding. I don't know whether that is because of the funding for social safety net or not, but the point I wanted to make is that not all social safety net programs are actually climate focused. In fact, we actually had some discussion with MOCA and few other ministries, like Ministry of Disaster Management, just to say, make it a point that these social safety net schemes could actually support the people for adaptation, for their resilience building, but currently it's not. And that would have to be the, how the scheme is being managed and the people are getting the money in their hand at what time, and also need-based and all that. That's not the case. So therefore, the way we are saying that counting SSN social safety net program to be climate financing is probably something to look into and see whether it can be counted as that. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. I think we should now round up if there is no others, and we do now look forward to the remarks of our special guest. But before that, Fahmida, would you like to react or anything?
I think there's no time, so I wouldn't respond anything. And I think our media friends also have got enough from the chief guest. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Fahmida. For supporting CPD. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Honorable Chief Guest was there. So, বাংলাই বলবো? আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে, তাহলে তো আরও ভালো হয়। অবশ্য সবাই ক্ষুধার্ত, তো এখন ইংরেজি শুনতে এমনিও ভালো লাগবে না, আমারও বলতে ভালো লাগতো না। ধন্যবাদ। আমি সিপিডিকে আন্তরিক ধন্যবাদ জানাই, আমার মতো মানে স্বল্প জ্ঞান সম্পন্ন ব্যক্তিকে বারবার এরকম অনুষ্ঠানে দাওয়াত দেওয়ার জন্যে। যেহেতু সাবের আঙ্কেল আসলে আমাদের সম্মানিত প্রধান অতিথি, তিনি তার পয়েন্টগুলো অত্যন্ত সুন্দরভাবে তুলে ধরেছেন, তো আসলে আমার বেশি বলার কিছু নেই। আমি ফাহমিদা আপাকে ধন্যবাদ জানাই যে তিনি যে অ্যানালাইসিসটি করেছেন এবং প্রেজেন্টেশনটি দিয়েছেন, এটি আসলেই অত্যন্ত ইনডেপথ এবং ইলাবোরেট। এখানে প্রায় সকল বিষয়ই অন্তর্ভুক্ত করা হয়েছে। আমি দু একটি পয়েন্ট শুধু বলবো, তার মধ্যে এখানে যেহেতু পাবলিক ফাইন্যান্সিং ম্যানেজমেন্ট নিয়ে কথাবার্তা হচ্ছে, মানে আমি আমার ছোটোখাটো যতটুকু জানাশোনা সেখান থেকে বলতে চাই। আমি একটি এক্সপিরিয়েন্স শেয়ার করি। আমি এই গত 5 তারিখ থেকে 8 তারিখ পর্যন্ত শিলংয়ে ছিলাম, ভারতে। সেখানে অবজারভারি রিসার্চ ফাউন্ডেশন, ওআরএফ এবং মেঘালয় গভর্নমেন্ট একটি আয়োজন করেছিল, নেচার বেস সলিউশন, লোকাল অ্যাডাপ্টেশন, এগুলো নিয়ে কথা হলো। অনেকে আমাদের স্পিকাররা বললেন সেখানে ফাইন্যান্সিং কিভাবে আসতে পারে, কিভাবে এখানে গভর্নমেন্ট আসতে পারে, আদার স্টেক হোল্ডার্সরা আসতে পারে। তা আমি যেহেতু দাওয়াত পেয়েছিলাম, আর শিলং খুব সুন্দর জায়গা, এই জন্য তার মিস করি নাই, গিয়েছি এবং পার্টিসিপেটও করলাম। তো সবাই জ্ঞানী জ্ঞানী ব্যক্তি, সবাই অনেক কিছু বলছেন, তো খুব উৎসাহব্যঞ্জক। যেহেতু নেচার বেস সলিউশন, লোকাল অ্যাডাপ্টেশন, এগুলো নিয়ে অনেক কথা হচ্ছে, আমাদের সরকারও আমরাও এটি আসলে বাংলাদেশের জন্য এটি খুব রেলিভেন্ট ইস্যু। তো ফাইন্যান্সের পার্টটি যখন আসলো, তখন ওখানে ধরেন প্রাইভেট ফাইন্যান্সিং যে ইনস্টিটিউশন আছে সেখান থেকে এবং ওয়ার্ল্ড ব্যাংকের প্রতিনিধি ছিলেন, ইউএনডিপির প্রতিনিধি ছিলেন, তারা বক্তব্য রাখছিলেন। এবং তারা বক্তব্য যখন রাখলেন তখন আমি আসলে কিছুটা পাজলড হয়ে গেলাম, কারণ তারা বক্তব্যে বললেন যে ইন্টারন্যাশনাল ইনস্টিটিউশন বলেন বা প্রাইভেট ইনস্টিটিউশন বলেন, তারা এখনও নেচার বেস সলিউশন বা লোকাল লেড অ্যাডাপ্টেশনকে ফাইন্যান্স করার মতো তারা এখনও প্রস্তুত না। তো প্রথম যখন কথাটা শুনলাম আমি তো একটু ধাক্কা খেলাম যে এত দূর এসে যদি এখন এই কথাটা শুনতে হয়। তো তারপরে তারা ব্যাখ্যা করলেন, যখন আমরা জানতে চাইলাম যে কেন, তারা বলছেন যে নেচার বেস সলিউশন বা লোকাল লেড অ্যাডাপ্টেশন এগুলো যে ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জকে আসলেই অ্যাড্রেস করবে বা সমস্যার সমাধান করবে, সেই পরিমাণ পর্যাপ্ত ডাটা বা অ্যাওয়ারনেস তাদের কাছে নেই। এখন ওই ফোরামে দাঁড়িয়ে ইন্টারন্যাশনাল রিপ্রেজেন্টেটিভরা যদি এই কথা বলেন, তাহলে আমাদের মতো মূর্খ সূর্খ মানুষরা কোথায় যাবে বলেন? তখন তো আর কিছু বলার থাকে না, কারণ এখানে তো কথাই হচ্ছে ফাইন্যান্স নিয়ে। তো তারা বলছেন যে এগুলোকে সাপোর্ট করার মতো যথেষ্ট পরিমাণ ডাটা তাদের কাছে নেই। আমি এই কথাটি এই কারণে বললাম, যে কথাটি সাবের আঙ্কেলও বললেন বা এখানে ফাহমিদা আপা তার প্রেজেন্টেশনে তুলে ধরেছেন, যে আমাদের কি পরিমাণ রিকোয়ারমেন্ট, আমাদের কি পরিমাণ প্রয়োজনীয়তা বাংলাদেশ বা ভালনারেবল কান্ট্রিগুলোর ক্ষেত্রে, এবং আমরা কি পরিমাণ সেই সাপোর্টটি পাচ্ছি, সেটির মধ্যে তো একটা ব্যাপক পার্থক্য রয়েছে। এটা নিয়ে তো অনেক আলোচনা হচ্ছে, এবং প্রত্যেকবার কপে যখন যাই তখন একই কথাই আমরা বলি যে আমাদের এত এই পরিমাণ অর্থ প্রয়োজন। হয়তো আমরা কিছুটা বাড়িয়েই বলি, সেটা তো সবাই বলবে যারা চায়, কিন্তু তারপরেও যতটুকু প্রয়োজন তার থেকে তো একটু আমরা যেটুকু পাচ্ছি সাপোর্ট, সেটা তো অনেক গ্যাপ। তো আমাদের যখন এই গ্যাপটি থাকবে, তখন আমরা যতই ক্যাপাসিটি বিল্ডিংয়ের কথা বলি, আমরা যতই অ্যাওয়ারনেসের কথা বলি, যতই অ্যাকাউন্টেবিলিটির কথা বলি, অবশ্যই সেগুলো প্রয়োজন, কারণ যতটুকু আছে তার মধ্যেও তো স্বচ্ছতা থাকতে হবে, তার মধ্যে সর্বোত্তম প্রয়োগের নিশ্চয়তা থাকতে হবে, এগুলো অত্যন্ত গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। কিন্তু যখন আমাদের এই প্রয়োজনীয়তা এবং প্রাপ্তির মধ্যে একটি বিশাল ঘাটতি থাকবে, তখন অন্য সব কিছু কিন্তু আসলে কিছুটা ফিকে হয়ে যেতে বাধ্য। এটা আমার মতামত। দ্বিতীয় যে পয়েন্টটি আমি বলতে চাই, ভেরি ইম্পর্টেন্ট, এখানে আমাদের ইউএনডিপির যিনি প্রতিনিধি ছিলেন, অন্যান্য বক্তারাও বলেছেন, লোকাল গভর্নমেন্টের যে ইন্টিগ্রেশন, এখানে ফাহমিদা আপার প্রেজেন্টেশনেও এসেছে, এটি আমি নিজে থেকে আসলে বলতে চাচ্ছিলাম যে আমাদের যে ক্লাইমেট বাজেট বা যে এক্সপেন্ডিচারটি হয়, তার সাথে আমাদের যে স্থানীয় সরকার রয়েছে, মানে আমি আমার অভিজ্ঞতা থেকে বলতে পারি, আমি সংসদ সদস্য হিসাবে স্থানীয় সরকারের সাথে যতটুকু আমার ইন্টারাকশন, অন্ততপক্ষে আমার উপজেলাতে তার কোনো প্রতিফলন আমি দেখি না। এখন এখানে বলা হলো, আমি হয়তো জানি না যে ইউএনডিপি, ওয়ার্ল্ড ব্যাংক বা মুস্তাফিজ ভাই বললেন তো যে এরকম নাকি প্রজেক্ট আছে যে অনেকগুলো উপজেলা ইনক্লুডেড আছে, আপনারাই তো বললেন। হ্যাঁ, তো সেটা হয়তো যে কোনো কারণেই হোক আমার উপজেলা হয়তো ইন্টিগ্রেটেড না, কিন্তু আমি তারপরেও আমি এই ফোরামের সদস্য হিসাবে আমাদের একটি অর্গানাইজেশন আছে ক্লাইমেট পার্লামেন্ট, যেখানে আমাদের অনেক মেম্বার অফ পার্লামেন্টরা ইনক্লুডেড। আমরা বাংলাদেশের অনেক জায়গায় গিয়েছি, সাউদার্ন পার্ট, নর্দার্ন পার্ট, কথা বলেছি ডিসি, এসপি, ইউনোদের সাথে, কিন্তু আমি কোথাও খুব একটা প্রতিফলন দেখি নাই যে এই ক্লাইমেট বাজেটটা কি, বা এই ক্লাইমেট বাজেটের যে একটা কম্পোনেন্ট রয়েছে এবং সেটা যে লোকাল গভর্নমেন্টের মাধ্যমেই খুবই ভালোভাবে ইমপ্লিমেন্ট করা যায়, কারণ তারা তো তৃণমূলের সাথে সরাসরি সম্পৃক্ত। সুতরাং সেই বিষয়টিতে তাদের খুব একটা ধারণা আছে বলে মনে হয় না, কারণ পরিবেশ বিপর্যয় ঠেকানোর জন্য সবার একটি ধারণা যে শুধু গাছ লাগালেই হয়ে যাবে। সুতরাং ওই বৃক্ষরোপণ কর্মসূচির মাধ্যমেই এই বিষয়টা সীমাবদ্ধ থাকার একটা প্রবণতা কিন্তু রয়েছে। তো আমি মনে করি যে এখানে এই লোকাল গভর্নমেন্টের সাথে একটা মানে সত্যিকার অর্থে কোলাবোরেশন দরকার। সেক্ষেত্রে আমাদেরও ভূমিকা তো অবশ্যই রাখতে হবে, আমাদের তো একটা মেজর ভূমিকা, সেটা পার্লামেন্ট বলেন, গভর্নমেন্ট বলেন, কিন্তু একই সাথে আমি মনে করি আমাদের ডেভেলপমেন্ট পার্টনার এবং এনজিওস এবং থিঙ্ক ট্যাঙ্ক যারা আছে, একটা সমন্বিত উদ্যোগ প্রয়োজন। কারণ এই যে আমরা বললাম যে আমরা নেচার বেস সলিউশনের কথা বলি, লোকাল লেড অ্যাডাপ্টেশনের কথা বলি, যত তার মানে কি, তার মানে তো এগুলো নেচার থেকে উঠে আসতে হবে, মানে একদম কমিউনিটি থেকে উঠে আসতে হবে। আমি এখানে একটা ছোট্ট উদাহরণ দিই, ওই যে কনফারেন্সের কথা বললাম, এখানে আমাদের আসাদুজ্জামান সাহেব একটি ইম্পর্টেন্ট কথা বলেছেন যে আমাদের যে ইলিশ প্রজননের সময় যে বন্ধ রাখা হয়, আমাদের জেলেদেরকে অনেক সহযোগিতা করা হয়, এটা সত্য কথা, আসলে একটি বিশাল সহযোগিতা কিন্তু করা হয়, আমার উপজেলাতেও করা হয়। তো মেঘালয়ে আমি দেখলাম যে ওখানে তো আসলে মানে বনভূমি বেশি এবং ওদের কমিউনিটি বেস সব কিছু, তো ওখানে এই বনগুলোকে সংরক্ষণ করার জন্য ওদের আবার কমিউনিটি ওয়াইজ তারা বনের মালিকানা আছে, তো তাদেরকে সরকার থেকে নির্দিষ্ট পরিমাণ অর্থ দেওয়া হয় যে তুমি তোমার বন এবং এখানকার ইকোলজিক্যাল সাপোর্টটা তুমি দেবা, তোমার কমিউনিটি দেবে, কিন্তু তোমাকে সরকার থেকে একটা প্রণোদনা দেওয়া হবে। তো এই মডেলটি আমি বলছি যে বাংলাদেশে হয়তো এই মডেলটি অন্যভাবে বাস্তবায়ন করা যেতে পারে, কিন্তু ওই কমিউনিটিকে ইনভলভ করার জন্য তাদেরকে কিন্তু একটি আমাদের যে সাপোর্ট, এখানে সোশ্যাল সেফটি নেটের কথা এসেছে, এটি গুরুত্বপূর্ণ বিষয়। সোশ্যাল সেফটি নেটের আওতায় মাননীয় প্রধানমন্ত্রী আসলে বাংলাদেশকে একটি সত্যিকার অর্থে একটি ওয়েলফেয়ার স্টেট হিসেবে গড়ে তুলেছেন। এখন আমাদের কাঠামোটা তৈরি হয়ে গেছে, এই কাঠামোর মধ্যে এখন ক্লাইমেট ভার্নারেবল যে গোষ্ঠী রয়েছে তাদেরকে কিভাবে লিঙ্কড করা যায়, সেটা কমিউনিটি বেসড হতে পারে, ইন্ডিভিজুয়াল বেসড হতে পারে, আর একটু বড় আকারেও হতে পারে, সেটি আমাদের চিন্তা করার একটি বিষয় রয়েছে। যেমন এখানে ক্লাইমেট লেড মাইগ্রেশন, আমাদের একটি ফোরাম আছে পার্লামেন্টারি ককাস অন মাইগ্রেশন, ওটার আমি সদস্য, এবং আমরা একটি ওয়ার্ল্ড ব্যাংক কিছুদিন আগে একটি রিপোর্ট প্রকাশ করেছে যে অলমোস্ট 14 মিলিয়ন পিপল নেক্সট 30 ইয়ার্সে ফ্রম 2022 ডিসপ্লেসড হবে, এবং এটি একটি বড় সমস্যা। আমরা যারা জনপ্রতিনিধি আছি, যেমন আমি আমার এলাকা নদী ভাঙন কবলিত এলাকা, চর এলাকা, আমি আমার নিজের উপজেলার মধ্যে দেখি যে এক ইউনিয়ন থেকে যখন অন্য ইউনিয়নে জনগণ চলে যায় তাদেরকে উদ্বাস্তু হিসাবে চিন্তা করে দেখেন, একই উপজেলা কিন্তু একই এলাকা, শুধুমাত্র নদীর ওপার থেকে এই পারে আসছে নদী ভাঙনের কারণে, তাদেরকে উদ্বাস্তু হিসাবে 10 বছর 15 বছর 20 বছর ধরে আছে, তারপরেও তারা উদ্বাস্তু ওখানে। তো এই যে একটি সমস্যা, এটি কিন্তু বড় সামাজিক সমস্যা, এগুলোকে অ্যাড্রেস করার জন্য যেমন মাননীয় প্রধানমন্ত্রী যে মানে ভূমিহীন মানুষের মাঝে যে গৃহ নির্মাণ করে দিচ্ছেন, এটি কিন্তু অনেক সময় অনেকে চিন্তা করেন যে আমরা বোধহয় পলিটিক্যাল মাইলেজ নেওয়ার জন্য এই কথাগুলো বলি, কিন্তু যারা ওখানে সম্পৃক্ত আমরা কিন্তু বুঝি যে আমার উপজেলাতে যারা নদী ভাঙন কবলিত মানুষ তারাই কিন্তু 90% ওই ভূমি আর বাড়িটি পেয়েছে। সুতরাং তার কিন্তু একটি মানে বড় সমস্যার সমাধান হয়ে গেছে। আমি বলছি যে এই রকম বিভিন্ন কার্যক্রমের মাধ্যমে আমরা এই বিষয়গুলো অ্যাড্রেস করতে পারি এবং সেখানে ক্লাইমেট ফাইন্যান্সিং বা যে বাজেটটা আছে সেটির আসলে মানে ভালো প্রয়োগ হতে পারে বলে আমি মনে করি। আরেকটি বিষয় বলে আমি শেষ করব, এখানে রিনিউয়েবল এনার্জির বিষয়টি এসেছে ফাহমিদা আপার প্রেজেন্টেশনে, ভেরি ইম্পর্টেন্ট, কারণ আমাদের রিনিউয়েবল এনার্জির ক্ষেত্রে যে টার্গেট আছে তার কাছাকাছিও আমরা অ্যাচিভ করতে পারি নাই, এবং বর্তমানে যে প্রেক্ষাপট সারা বিশ্বে যে জ্বালানি নিরাপত্তা নিয়ে যে সংকট, সেটা আমরা কোভিডের পরবর্তী বলি, যুদ্ধের কারণে বলি, সেটিতে এই যে চ্যালেঞ্জ আমাদের সামনে আছে, আমাদের যে টার্গেট আছে সে টার্গেট আমরা আসলে ফুলফিল করতে পারবো না। তো সেক্ষেত্রে আমাদেরকে অবশ্যই এই সমস্যার মধ্যেও রিনিউয়েবল এনার্জি মিক্সটা কিভাবে বাড়ানো যায়, এবং সেটি আমরা দেখেছি যে শুধুমাত্র বাংলাদেশের একার পক্ষে সম্ভব না। সাবের আঙ্কেল বললেন না যে দূষণের ক্ষেত্রে যেমন রিজিওনাল প্রভাব আছে, সেরকম রিনিউয়েবল এনার্জির ক্ষেত্রেও আমি মনে করি রিজিওনাল কোঅপারেশন ইজ ভেরি ভেরি ইম্পর্টেন্ট। বাংলাদেশ নেপালের সাথে একটি চুক্তি করেছে জলবিদ্যুৎ প্রকল্প, জলবিদ্যুৎ আমদানির জন্য। ভারতের সাথে চুক্তি হয়েছে, সেখান থেকে সোলার এনার্জি আসবে। কিন্তু এই বিষয়গুলো ওই পিসমিল আলাদা আলাদা না করে রিজিওনাল কোঅপারেশন যদি করা যায়, একটি ইনিশিয়েটিভ আমাদের ক্লাইমেট পার্লামেন্টের পক্ষ থেকে নেওয়া হয়েছে, এটাকে BBIN বলা হয়, বাংলাদেশ ভুটান ইন্ডিয়া নেপাল কোলাবোরেশন। সেখানে আমরা এই এনার্জি এক্সচেঞ্জ, আমরা কিভাবে ভারত থেকে সোলার বা নেপাল ভুটান থেকে জলবিদ্যুৎ আনতে পারি, কিভাবে কমন গ্রিড ব্যবহার করতে পারি। আমি এই কথাটি এই কারণে বললাম যে রিনিউয়েবল এনার্জি মানে আমাদের ট্রানজিশন, গ্রিন ট্রানজিশনের ক্ষেত্রে তো এনার্জি ইজ দ্য মেইন ফ্যাক্টর। কারণ এখানে যে হিসাব দেওয়া হলো যে আমি দেখলাম যে এই মানে ফসিল ফুয়েলে যে বরাদ্দ ওই 93, 94, 95-এর মধ্যেই আছে। এটা কোনোবারও 90-এর নিচে নামেনি এবং এটা আরও সামনে বাড়ার সম্ভাবনা আছে। কারণ আপনি রাজনীতিবিদই বলেন বা সাধারণ জনগণই বলেন, আমার যখন লোডশেডিং হবে, আমার যখন এনার্জি ক্রাইসিস হবে, তখন কিন্তু আমি সবুজ, কমলা, হলুদ, লাল কোনো কিছু চিন্তা করব না, আমার শুধু বিদ্যুৎ দরকার, এটাই চিন্তা করব। এবং সেটা কিন্তু গত কিছুদিনে ঘটেছে। সুতরাং সেক্ষেত্রে আমি মনে করি রিজিওনাল কোঅপারেশন একটি ভেরি ইম্পর্টেন্ট থিং। আরেকটি বিষয় আমি বলতে চাই যে অর্থ দরকার, ক্যাপাসিটি বিল্ড করা দরকার, সেটা আমাদের IMED বলেন বা স্থানীয় সরকার বলেন, যারা ইমপ্লিমেন্ট করবে। যেমন বন ও পরিবেশ মন্ত্রণালয়ে কিন্তু আমাদেরকে লিডিং মিনিস্ট্রি বলা হয়ে থাকে, কিন্তু অধিকাংশ প্রজেক্ট ইমপ্লিমেন্ট করার ক্ষেত্রে আসলে আমাদের কোনো ভূমিকা নাই বা আমাদের সেই কোঅর্ডিনেশনটা নাই। এখন LGED যখন কোনো ক্লাইমেট বাজেট থেকে কোনো ফান্ড নিয়ে প্রজেক্ট ইমপ্লিমেন্ট করবে, তাদের সেই ক্লাইমেট সেন্সিটিভিটি আছে কিনা বা ক্লাইমেট নলেজ আছে কিনা যারা করবে, সেটি নিয়ে কিন্তু একটা বড় রকমের সন্দেহ রয়েছে। তো সুতরাং সেক্ষেত্রে এই ক্যাপাসিটি বিল্ডিংটা গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। আরেকটি ভেরি ইম্পর্টেন্ট থিং, আমরা নেচার বেস সলিউশন বলি, লোকাল লেড অ্যাডাপ্টেশন বলি, যেটাই বলি, শুধু পয়সা দিয়ে সব কিছু হবে না। কারণ পয়সা থাকলো কিন্তু সেটাকে ইমপ্লিমেন্ট করার মতো কারিগরি দক্ষতা, জ্ঞান আমার থাকলো না, তাহলে তো পকেটে ওই পয়সা নিয়ে লাভ নাই। সুতরাং যে কথাটি আমরা বারবার সবসময় বলে আসি, এই ক্লাইমেট কনফারেন্সেও বলি, বিভিন্ন ফোরামেও বলি, যে গ্লোবাল নর্থ থেকে আমাদের যে টেকনোলজি ট্রান্সফারটি প্রয়োজন, সব জায়গায় তো অর্থের প্রয়োজন নেই। এই তথ্যগত জ্ঞান বা কারিগরি দক্ষতা বৃদ্ধির জন্য আমাদের যে সাপোর্টটি দরকার, সেটি কিন্তু অনেক ক্ষেত্রে খুবই গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। সেটি যদি না আসে, শুধু টাকা নিয়ে আসলাম কিন্তু টাকার যথাযথ ব্যবহার করার মতো আমার জ্ঞানই থাকলো না, প্রযুক্তিই থাকলো না, তাহলে আসলে কোনো লাভ হবে না। তো আমি আর আপনাদের বিরক্ত করব না। আমাকে সুযোগ দেওয়ার জন্য অনেক অনেক ধন্যবাদ সিপিডিকে, এবং আপনাদের শোনার জন্য অসংখ্য ধন্যবাদ। খোদা হাফেজ, আসসালামু আলাইকুম।
ধন্যবাদ মাননীয় বিশেষ অতিথি আপনার মূল্যবান বক্তব্যের জন্য। ডিয়ার অডিয়েন্স, আপনাদের সবার কাছে অত্যন্ত কৃতজ্ঞ আমরা যে আপনারা এতক্ষণ ধরে আমাদের সাথে আছেন। প্রথমে ধন্যবাদ জানাতে চাই ডক্টর ফাহমিদাকে, একটা সুন্দর প্রতিবেদন উপস্থাপন করেছেন যেটা আমাদের আলোচনাকে ট্রিগার করেছে। এবং তারপর আমাদের প্রধান অতিথি, বিশেষ অতিথি আলোচনা করেছেন। আমাদের যারা 5 জন বিশেষজ্ঞ আলোচক ছিলেন তাদের প্রতিও কৃতজ্ঞ। খুবই কংক্রিট অনেকগুলো সাজেশন এসেছে, এবং যেটা নাকি আমাদের প্রধান অতিথি বললেন যে এটার কিন্তু আমরা একটা সামারি করব, সামারি করে আমরা তাদের কাছে এটা দেব, এবং ফলো আপ করার জন্য যেটা যে পার্লামেন্টারি ককাস, আমাদেরও একটা পার্লামেন্টারি ককাস করার আমরা চেষ্টা করছি, সেগুলো দিয়ে আমরা পার্সু করব। আপনারা যারা আলোচনা করলেন, প্রশ্ন করলেন, তাদেরকে ধন্যবাদ। আমাদের আলোচনাটা কিন্তু আজকের যেটা করেছে, এটা যেটা প্রধান অতিথি বলেছেন যে মানে এক্সিস্টেন্সিয়াল একটা প্রশ্ন, বাংলাদেশের অস্তিত্বের প্রশ্ন কিন্তু এটা। সুতরাং সেখানে আমাদের অর্থায়ন কিভাবে হবে, আর্থিক ব্যবস্থাপনা জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনের প্রেক্ষিতে কিভাবে আমরা করব, এগুলো খুবই গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। একই সাথে আজকের আলোচনায় তথ্য উপাত্তর প্রয়োজনীয়তার কথা আসছে। আজকের আলোচনায় আমাদের যে তৃণমূল পর্যায়ে যে ঝুঁকি, তার সাথে আমাদের জাতীয় যেসব পরিকল্পনা, তার সমন্বয়ের কথা আসছে। আমরা কিন্তু দেখেছি যে বাংলাদেশের যেটা নাকি এখানে প্রধান অতিথিও বললেন যে SDG গোল 13 যেটা ক্লাইমেটের সাথে সংশ্লিষ্ট, সেখানে কিন্তু বাংলাদেশ ভালো করছে। আমাদের অনেক ধরনের নীতিমালাও আছে, কিন্তু এটার জন্য বাস্তবায়ন করার জন্য অর্থের প্রয়োজন। তো সেখানে আমাদের এই তৃণমূলের যে ঝুঁকি এবং তারপরে জাতীয় পর্যায়ের নীতিমালার সমন্বয় করতে পারলে আমাদের অর্থটা আমরা আরও ভালোভাবে ব্যবহার করতে পারবো। এবং এখানে এটাও এসেছে, আমাদের উন্নয়ন সহযোগীরাও যে কাজ করছেন সেটার প্রশংসা যেমন এসেছে, একই সাথে COP26, COP27 এবং আগামীতে COP28 আসবে, এবং আরও অন্যান্য যেসব যে গ্লোবাল যেসব ফোরামে এই জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনের বিষয়গুলো নিয়ে আলোচনা হচ্ছে, সেখানে যে ধরনের অর্থায়নের প্রয়োজন এবং সেখানে কথা বলা হচ্ছে তার প্রেক্ষিতে কিন্তু আমাদের উন্নয়ন সহযোগীরা অনেক ক্ষেত্রেই এগিয়ে আসছেন না। তো সেইটাও কিন্তু আছে যে জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনের প্রেক্ষিতে অভিযোজন, প্রশমন, প্রতিরক্ষণ সব দিকেই কিন্তু আমাদের অর্থের প্রয়োজন হবে। তো সেদিক থেকে আমাদের আশা থাকবে যে আমাদের সরকারও এটা অনুধাবন করে যেসব নীতিমালা ভালো গ্রহণ করা হয়েছে সেগুলো তারা বাস্তবায়ন করবেন। আবার আমাদের উন্নয়ন সহযোগী যারা আছেন তারাও আমাদেরকে সহায়তা করবেন। অনেকগুলি বিষয় আছে যেগুলো কেবলমাত্র বাংলাদেশের হয়তো ভৌগোলিক সীমানার মধ্যে সীমাবদ্ধ থাকার এটা থাকছে না, এটার একটা ক্রস বর্ডার, এটার বিভিন্ন ধরনের অভিঘাত আছে, সেখানে আমাদের আঞ্চলিক সমন্বয়েরও প্রয়োজন পড়বে, সেটাও কিন্তু আজকে বলা হয়েছে। সুতরাং সবটা মিলিয়ে আমার মনে হয় যে খুব সুন্দর একটা আলোচনা হয়েছে, যেটা আমাদের নীতিমালা প্রণয়ন এবং বাস্তবায়ন, অর্থায়ন সব দিক থেকে এটা একটা গুরুত্বপূর্ণ ভূমিকা রাখবে। আপনাদের সবাইকে ধন্যবাদ আরেকবার, এবং আমরা চলেন একসাথে এখন আমরা দুপুরের আহার গ্রহণ করি।